name is Sergeants. Will you begin your recordings?
PC recording started.
Okay, cloud recording has started. Good morning and welcome to today's New York City Council hearing on transportation and infrastructure joint with resiliency and waterfronts. At this time, will all panelists please turn on your videos for verification purposes. To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices on vibrate or in silent mode. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chairs, we may begin now.
Thank you for joining today's joint hearing of the Transportation and Infrastructure and Resiliency and Waterfront Committees. First, I would like to acknowledge my other colleagues who have joined us so far today. We are joined by Chair Kagan and Council members Lewis, Marte, Narcisse, Palladino, Ariola, and Brewer. Before my opening statement, I want to first turn it over to our committee counsel, Elliot Lynn, to go over some procedural items.
Thank you, Chair. I am Elliot Lynn, counsel to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee of the New York City Council. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you're called on to testify, when you will be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on panelists one at a time to testify. Please listen for your name to be called. Our first panelist will be from the Department of Transportation and the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Testifying on behalf of DOT will be Assistant Commissioner for Policy Will Carey, and on behalf of MOCEJ will be Executive Director Kizzy Charles Guzman. They will be joined for questions by the Chief Operating Officer for the Department of Environmental Protection, Vinny Sapienza. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask a question, please use the Zoom raised hand function and I will call on you in order. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, which includes the time it takes to answer your questions. Please note that for ease of this virtual hearing, we will not be allowing a second round of questions for each panelist. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Chair Brooks Powers to give an opening statement.
Thank you, Elliot. And good morning once again, and welcome to this joint hearing of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Committee on Resiliency and Waterfronts. Today's hearing is titled Assessing New York City's Infrastructure, Laying the Foundation for Federal Infrastructure Funding. I am excited to co-chair this hearing with my colleague, Chair to the Committee on Resiliency and Waterfronts, Councilmember Kagan. Before we turn to the topic at hand, I want to first take a moment to acknowledge those hurt in the tragic shooting incident that occurred on the subway in Sunset Park last week. I also want to express my gratitude to the transit workers and first responders for assisting subway riders in the immediate aftermath of the attack. I also want to take a moment to recognize my colleague, Councilmember Alexa Aviles. If we want to encourage New Yorkers to return to the public transportation, we have to ensure that they feel safe on our trains and buses. In the coming months, this committee will address the mayor and MTA's plans for addressing safety issues on public transit. Today's hearing will focus on the state of the city's aging infrastructure and how the funding tied to the recently passed Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as IIJA, can be used to revitalize these crucial facilities. We will also use this hearing as a forum to question the city agencies about their plans to ensure new infrastructure funding is invested equitably across our communities. Significant investments in our infrastructure are needed to make sure New York City remains a world-class city and can continue to meet its lofty economic, transportation, and climate goals. Whether you're dealing with a long commute to Manhattan from my district in Southeast Queens and the Rockaways, or experiencing the impacts of flooding on Coney Island and Councilmember Kagan's district, it's not hard to see that the city has serious work to do. For too long, we've prioritized the short term and deferred preventative maintenance and investment in things like our roads and bridges, leading to much higher costs down the road. Failing to prioritize infrastructure investments doesn't just impact our ability to deliver positive outcomes in the areas of transportation and resiliency. It also has ripple effects that put safety at risk and cripple our ability to promote access to jobs and economic growth. With the passage of the Federal Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act last year, the city has an unprecedented opportunity to make serious commitments to our most critical infrastructure projects. As chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I am committed to making sure these funds are used efficiently and equitably. While all communities in the city will benefit from increased funding for infrastructure, it's important that we not miss this chance to pay back some of the debt owed to communities that have experienced decades of disinvestment, had their neighborhoods divided by highways, or watched the city fail to address the growing threat of climate change in their neighborhoods. Much of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is business as usual, as far as how federal infrastructure dollars are allocated, with the majority of funding flowing through existing pathways that do not mandate an equity lens. This is why it is critical that the council make its voice heard regarding our priorities. The Department of Transportation and the other city and state agencies, including the MTA and Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, implementing the funding from the federal infrastructure bill, must look for opportunities to invest in traditionally underinvested communities as they implement the bill's funding. This can include weighting disinvested communities when considering projects and applying for competitive grants, seeking genuine community engagement and feedback, and providing evidence of that, and approaching the process with the needs of historically underserved communities in mind. In the engagement process, our city agencies could also consider providing funding or technical assistance to help neighborhoods advance community-driven projects where feasible. The Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act allows recipients to create local hiring preferences for projects using federal funds, and agencies in New York City should leverage this to benefit of MWBEs as much as possible. The federal infrastructure bill is only the first step in addressing disparities created through decades of disinvestment. As chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I plan to continue conducting oversight to make sure that our dollars are spent efficiently and effectively and reach the communities where they are most needed. My colleague, Chair Kagan, will soon speak more to our specific infrastructure needs with regard to climate resiliency, but I want to make clear, climate change is happening now. And like other issues facing our city, its impacts will be borne most heavily by our most vulnerable communities. We saw that firsthand last summer with the tragic flooding that claimed lives in Queens. This is a pivotal time for infrastructure in the city, and we can't let this opportunity go to waste. I look forward to hearing from the city agencies before us today and how they plan to make use of this opportunity, and from my colleagues and the public about what they feel the city should be prioritizing. But before we hear from the administration, I will next turn it over to Chair of the Committee on Resiliency and Waterfronts, Chair Councilmember Ari Kagan.
Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Ari Kagan, and I have the privilege of chairing the Committee on Resiliency and Waterfronts. First, I would like to thank my great co-chair, Majority Whip, Sylvina Brooks Powers, for holding this hearing, and again, welcome you to what should be an informative and enlightening hearing. As I stated during our joint hearing with the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management earlier this month, coastal flooding and severe storms are becoming more intense and more severe. Even simple heavy rain yesterday caused a lot of serious problems for ordinary New Yorkers. We have a huge task in front of us, and we must be proactive in how we make our city, our shorelines, and our infrastructure more resilient. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which President Biden signed into law on November 15, 2021, provides $1.2 trillion in funding to strengthen the country's resilience and build the necessary infrastructure to combat the multitude of climate hazards we are now facing. Of the $1.2 trillion, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, will have $6.8 billion to invest in community-wide mitigation projects. This money is in addition to the money that FEMA has already committed through its Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, program and Communities and Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program. Today, we will hear from the administration on how the city plans to access this funding, what grants programs are available, what funding they applied for, and what more needs to be done in order to access this funding to the maximum extent practical. We have a lot of urgent needs, like fixing the broken Coney Island boardwalk, improving current water basins and old sewers, installing new lights on streets and along boardwalk, etc. During our hearing earlier this month, this committee discussed Local Law 122, which was enacted last year and requires the administration to develop a comprehensive citywide climate adaptation plan to study the suite of climate hazards and recommend resiliency and adaptation measures to protect city residents, property, and infrastructure from the effects of climate changes. I look forward to hearing from the administration on how it would use this federal funding to ensure that after this plan is completed, projects are constructed to help make the city more resilient to the effects of climate change. I look forward to hearing from the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Environmental Protection. We must work together to secure the necessary funding for these important resiliency projects that will better prepare our city against our next climate disaster. Before we begin, I would like to thank my committee staff, Senior Committee Counsel Jessica Steinberg-Albin, Senior Policy Analyst Patrick Mulvihill, Senior Finance Analyst Jonathan Seltzer, and my Legislative and Budget Director Atir Tirmizi, as well as the staff of Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for all their hard work putting this hearing together. I would like now to turn back to my great co-chair, Majority Whip Selvina Brooks Powers.
Thank you, Chair Kagan. And before I turn it over to the moderator, I just would like to acknowledge that we have now been joined by our colleagues, Council Members Yeager, Rivera, Ressler, Carr, and Lee. I will now turn it over to our moderator to swear in the administration.
Thank you, Chair. I'll now call on the administration panelists to testify. First, from the Department of Transportation, Assistant Commissioner for Policy, Will Carey, Associate Commissioner for Grants and Fiscal Management, Yogesh Sanghvi, Executive Director of Capital Program Planning, Leslie Wolf, and Assistant Commissioner for Intergovernmental and Community Affairs, Rebecca Zach. From the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, Executive Director Kizzy Charles Guzman, Deputy Director Kathleen Schmid, and Deputy Director Carrie Grassi. And from the Department of Environmental Protection, Chief Operating Officer Vinny Sapienza. Before we begin, I'll administer the affirmation. I'll call on each of you individually to confirm your response aloud for the record. Please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before these committees, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Assistant Commissioner Carey?
I do.
Associate Commissioner Sanghvi?
I do.
Executive Director Wolf?
I do.
Assistant Commissioner Zach?
She's having issues with her audio.
Okay. Executive Director Charles Guzman?
I do.
Deputy Director Schmid? Deputy Director Schmid?
She's on mute.
Also on mute. Deputy Director Grassi?
I'm
Deputy
now off
Director-
mute. Oh, sorry. And I do.
Thank you. Deputy Director Grassi? Okay, we'll circle back. Chief Operating
Thanks for
Officer.
unmuting me. Yes, I do.
Great. Chief Operating Officer Sapienza?
Oh, I'm muted now. I do.
And Assistant Commissioner Zach.
I do.
Thank you. You may begin your testimony when ready.
Executive Director Kizzy Charles Guzman will be giving testimony first.
Thank you. I need to be unmuted. Okay, now I am. Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kizzy Charles Guzman. I'm the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. I want to start by thanking Chairs Kagan and Brooks Powers and the committee members of the Resiliency and Waterfronts and also the Transportation and Infrastructure Committees for the opportunity to testify today. I began in this role just 2 months ago, so it's nice to see some of you again after last week's hearing on storms. Just wanted to reiterate how eager I am to work with all of you in the council as we prepare the city to meet the environmental needs of the coming decades. I also just want to acknowledge and thank my colleagues, Deputy Directors Katie Smith and Carrie Grassi from the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, who will join me in answering your questions today. And as you know, we're also joined by our colleagues at the Department of Transportation, Will Carey, Assistant Commissioner for Policy, and also Yogesh Sanvi, Associate Commissioner for Grants and Fiscal Management, Leslie Wolf, Executive Director of Capital Program Planning, and Rebecca Sack, Assistant Commissioner for Intergovernmental and Community Affairs. Additionally, we're joined by Vinny Sapienza, Chief Operating Officer at the Department of Environmental Protection. So all of us are here in full force to answer your questions today. As many of you know, there is a new configuration of the new Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Our role is to lead the city's strategic direction as it pertains to environmental sustainability and resiliency, now with a focus on environmental justice. And we work on coordinating with city agencies to implement this important work citywide. I am thrilled to lead a team that will ensure that New York City is prepared to withstand and to emerge stronger from the impacts of climate change, but also mitigate its greenhouse gas and pollutant emissions and implement remediation and environmental coordination efforts from an equity and public health perspective. My office, MOCEJ, is working to shift our city away from fossil fuels and towards a green economy by committing to carbon neutrality by 2050. This includes taking action to decarbonize our transportation sector, which is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our city. To share just a few accomplishments related to transportation for today's hearing, New York City has steadily increased its bicycle network with over 542 miles of conventional bike lanes and 162 miles of protected bike lanes built since 2014. We've also expanded the network of greenways, which provide safe and accessible corridors for active recreation and non-motorized transportation through parks and streets. Today, there are more than 150 miles of greenway paths, with over 7,000 daily bikers on Hudson River Greenway alone. These accomplishments are in addition to the city's leadership on electric vehicle transition. The Department of Citywide Administrative Services has transitioned nearly 20,000 units, or about 67% of the city's fleet, to alternative fuels. And in 2021, the city piloted its first 2 electric school buses, and a 3rd bus is coming this year. The Department of Transportation has also developed an electric vehicle plan called Electrifying New York that lays out initiatives to dramatically expand access to public chargers across the 5 boroughs. So as we work to reduce the city's emissions, improve air quality, and support more sustainable energy sources, the city is also working tirelessly to adapt to climate change so we are prepared to respond to chronic conditions like prolonged summer heat and tidal flooding, as well as acute events such as summer heat waves and flooding caused by coastal storm surge and extreme rainfall. This multi-hazard approach allows us to understand how several climate hazards can result in compounded impacts to people and to prioritize work that provides multiple benefits to New Yorkers. We're also establishing several layers of resiliency across the many different scales in the city to respond to these various hazards. So for example, to cool New Yorkers, the city operates cooling centers for vulnerable populations and is also planting trees and coating roofs white and is greening our streets, and increasing permeability in our right-of-way, which helps to lower temperatures and better drain stormwater after extreme rain. We have been working for more than a decade to make New Yorkers safer as we face climate hazards and have completed hundreds of projects and implemented important policy changes. So to us, green infrastructure, expanded sewers, grid redundancy, coastal protection projects, emergency communication, tree planting, school roofs, reforms to our building and zoning codes, and flood insurance are all critical components of our strategy. Our work to develop and strengthen our infrastructure in response to climate change must continue to move forward with urgency, funding, and partnership within all levels of government. We are striving to operationalize environmental justice throughout the city by undertaking the city's first comprehensive study on environmental justice as required by local laws 60 and 64 of 2017. The work will analyze environmental and climate issues and identify which communities are being disproportionately impacted by environmental burdens and which are not seeing the benefits of green investments made by the city. This work will inform how the city will address activities that exacerbate environmental justice concerns and set the stage for a set of equitable climate actions, including those that will be catalyzed by federal funding. Today's hearing is focused on federal funding, particularly for resilient transportation infrastructure. Federal funding is critical to achieving the city's ambitious climate goals because of the enormous cost to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and adapt to climate impacts. Despite these costs, we think of the benefits as being even more significant. Federally funded climate projects can generate incredible economic activity and green jobs to transform our energy system, retrofit our buildings, and protect residents from environmental hazards. Federal funding opportunities, such as those discussed today, will play a pivotal role in the development of a greener economy, which is essential as we recover from the effects of the pandemic. The city is going after every dollar we can as this once-in-a-generation level of investment that presents an opportunity for the city to access funding for many critical infrastructure projects will benefit residents for decades to come. Our office is one of many working with the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and city agencies to ensure that we secure this funding to benefit New Yorkers and that we identify projects that are equitable, effective, and feasible. These funds are coming through both formula funding streams that we are familiar with, as well as some new programs, including ones to fund energy efficiency projects and drinking water system resiliency. In total, according to the White House, the bipartisan infrastructure law funds over 350 distinct programs, many of which are new. Our office is coordinating with OMB and city agencies to take full advantage of these resources as they become available. For example, we are trying to advance safe and resilient streets with New York City Department of Transportation by exploring potential grants from the US Department of Transportation and Department of Energy to fund improvements to our transportation networks, build safer and more accessible streets and bike lanes, and embed resiliency into our public right-of-way. We're also working with the city's DOT and DCAS to explore how we can install electrification and charging infrastructure for bikes, scooters, cars, and delivery vehicles. Additionally, we're seeking to ensure environmental co-benefits, stormwater solutions, and cleaner air by partnering with City DOT and Parks Department to take advantage of funding to integrate porous pavement into street projects and low carbon concrete in capital projects. Further, we're looking to improve resiliency of the city's low and moderate income residents by partnering with NYCHA and the city's Department of Housing, Preservation and Development to use federal funding to weatherize, decarbonize, and flood-proof New Yorkers' homes. These funds flow through the bipartisan infrastructure law under US Department of Energy programs and the US Department of Housing and Urban Development's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery funding provided after Hurricane Ida. Finally, we hope to catalyze a new set of resiliency projects and efforts by partnering with the city's Office of Emergency Management to secure FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities funding, so that's called BRIC funding, to advance projects that will be planned for and implemented by the city's Parks Department, EDC, NYCHA, and the Departments of Environmental Protection and Transportation. These projects could support critical coastal infrastructure, heat mitigation, and building level flood mitigation. These funds flow through the New York State Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. So for new and existing competitive grants, which will require successful applications from states and local governments to win funds, federal agencies are currently developing guidance to establish the eligibility criteria, and they will release that guidance and open application periods over the next year for fiscal year 2023. The bipartisan infrastructure law is a 5-year spending bill, making grant funding available this year as well as in future fiscal years. For formula funding, which is used for recurring needs like preventative maintenance and is annually set aside and designed to flow through New York State, we are working with our state partners to understand how much funding New York City will receive. So as we wait for federal and state guidance and more information, the Deputy Mayor of Operations has convened conversations with OMB on federal infrastructure funding to collectively assess city priorities, troubleshoot challenges relating to securing and implementing federally funded projects, and align agencies with the city's infrastructure priorities. As a city, our coordination and preparation are designed to ensure that we are taking maximum advantage of all available federal funds once we have all the information we need to apply. It is only once we have federal guidance regarding the grant criteria that the city will be able to develop its applications. As city agencies begin the application processes, agencies will assess which projects meet the strict criteria and timeline constraints for each program. I also want to note and emphasize that because the Office of Climate and Environmental Justice is not a capital agency, our role is not to apply for funding or implement projects and programs, but rather to coordinate and set policy direction. This is a role that we take very seriously as we explore the best possible agency submissions for these various funding streams. One example of how we provide policy direction is through our pilot projects for the Climate Resiliency Design Guideline. In March of 2021, the administration worked with the City Council to pass Local Law 41, which developed a pilot program for city agencies to integrate those guidelines and provide a resiliency score for public projects. The law established that by 2026, all city projects must meet a stringent set of requirements that will certify their preparedness for extreme weather events. There are now 23 city capital agencies participating in the pilot program that will begin designing and constructing new projects using the Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines. And over 40% of projects being advanced under this program will be constructed in environmental justice areas in New York City. Additionally, our office holds a valuable knowledge base as it relates to our experiences coordinating the city's Hurricane Sandy coastal resiliency efforts. Many of our lessons learned regarding the implementation of large coastal protection projects are now documented in a report that we released in December of 2021 called the Neighborhood Coastal Flood Protection Planning Guidance. This document reviews how, moving forward, the city can do a better job equitably addressing local neighborhood needs, increasing resiliency, and applying the best design standards. This document does not address how to apply for federal funding, but rather what to do once a project is funded. Finally, this summer, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will release a tentatively selected plan for the Army Corps' New York, New Jersey Harbor and Tributaries feasibility study, which will lay out an approach to coastal resiliency investments for the entire New York Harbor and lay the groundwork for a whole new set of federal coastal infrastructure projects. While this study is not part of the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law, it will have a significant impact on federal funding for the future, so federal future dollars that the city can access in the coming years. The tentatively selected plan will be followed by a review period where the city and the public will have a chance to comment on the Army Corps' recommendation. Our office will lead the city's effort to review and provide comprehensive comments on the tentatively selected plan. The Corps will then take the comments, followed by further study, evaluation, and design, and finalize the recommendation in a final report that will be completed by 2024. That final report will help the city advocate to Congress for a new phase of significant federal investments for resiliency. To close, the city has made great strides towards a multi-hazard and multi-layer approach to resilience and sustainability, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Much of it can only be accomplished through the collaboration, partnership, and funding from our local, state, and federal partners. And I am really optimistic about our ability to meet these challenges rapidly and equitably for all New Yorkers. And we look forward to partnering with Council to do so. So I would like to thank the committees on resiliency and waterfronts and transportation and infrastructure for allowing me to testify here today. I look forward to your questions following my colleague's testimony, and I yield the floor now to my colleague, Will Carey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kizzy. Good morning, Chair Brooks Powers, Chair Kagan, and members of the Committees on Transportation and Infrastructure and Resiliency and Waterfronts. I am Will Carey, Assistant Commissioner for Policy at NYC DOT. And my colleagues and I are happy to testify today with our colleagues at MOCEJ and DEP. It's an honor for us to be here on behalf of Commissioner Roger Rodriguez to discuss the topic of assessing New York City's infrastructure and laying the foundation for federal infrastructure funding. NYC DOT is committed to maintaining our streets, bridges, and the Staten Island Ferry in a state of good repair, while ensuring that our infrastructure is protected from the impacts of the climate crisis. We seek to improve safety and expand transportation choices for all New Yorkers, especially those who live in historically underserved communities. I will speak to how we, working closely with our partner agencies, are going after every dollar available from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the BIL, to advance projects that will benefit all New Yorkers for decades to come. And I will also discuss how we incorporate resiliency into our work and play a role in large multi-agency resiliency projects. I'll start with a little context on the role that federal funding plays in our capital budget. Of DOT's $20.3 billion in capital expenditures over the past 20 years, $14.9 billion, or about 73%, were funded by the city. $1.2 billion, or 6%, were funded by New York State, and $4.2 billion, or 21%, were funded by the federal government. Most of these funds have come through a succession of 5-year federal surface transportation bills, the latest of which is the BIL. While state and federal funding sources play an important role, the majority of our capital plan will continue to be funded by city dollars. Federal funds for transportation typically flow to DOT in 3 ways. First, as formula funds. These are block grants to New York State, which the state in turn distributes to us and other localities. Second, DOT can secure funding through discretionary funds, which are competitive grants. While the selection criteria for these grants are outlined in the authorizing statute, the transportation policies of the president and the transportation secretary at the time typically influence which applications are funded. Third, New York State may choose to distribute some formula funding to local governments through its own competitive grant programs. And in addition to the regular surface transportation bill, over the years, we have received federal funds from special sources. These include, September 11th recovery, Hurricane Sandy relief, and COVID-19 relief. And in the past, we have received member designated funding, or so-called earmarks. Although there are no transportation earmarks in the BIL, earmarks returned for the first time as part of the fiscal year 2020 omnibus spending bill. Now, turning to the BIL. The BIL is a 5-year surface transportation reauthorization, which increased the funding levels for many existing programs, as well as created several new programs. The BIL is also a multi-year appropriations act. It's important to note that the BIL funded much, although not all, of the spending levels and programs it authorized. At the outset, I want to say how eager we are to work closely with the state to make the most of this once-in-a-generation funding opportunity. New York City and New York State have a long history of working together to invest in the city's multimodal transportation network. New York State has given us information on its share of existing formula programs under the bill, and we are awaiting further details on how the state plans to distribute the new funding programs. These new programs could help NYC DOT address critical funding needs that are essential to building a stronger economy and a resilient future for the city, the state, and the region. Sharing these new funding programs widely with local governments is also consistent with the Federal Highway Administration's direction to state governments. In a public memo in December 2021, Stephanie Pollack, the FHWA administrator, wrote, quote, FHWA staff shall emphasize to our planning and project selection and project delivery stakeholders, i.e. the states, that the resources made available under the BIL can and should be applied to modernize all eligible streets, highways, and bridges, not just those owned and operated by state departments of transportation, unquote. This is critical as many roadways in need of infrastructure investment are not part of the state or federal highway systems. Turning first to the formula funding in the BIL. NYC DOT anticipates receiving a total of about $1.3 billion in highway formula funding from the BIL over the next 5 years. Prior to the bill's passage, our agency had already programmed about $470 million in federal funds in our expense and capital budgets, based on the assumption that Congress would pass another transportation reauthorization. This means that about $830 million will be available to program in future financial plans. The state of New York recently informed us that its initial allocation for existing formula programs will be $193 million. So that's the amount that we would get. This is a 23% increase from our previous annual allocation of $157 million, and consistent with the share of federal formula funding NYC DOT typically receives. For new programs, NYC DOT is awaiting guidance from the state as to how these funds will be distributed. These programs include the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, or PROTECT, which funds resiliency programs, the Carbon Reduction Program, which funds bike, pedestrian, and bus projects, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which funds electric vehicle charging stations, and the Bridge Formula Program, or BFP, the largest new program in the BIL. Based on USDOT's apportionment tables, in federal fiscal year 22, New York State is slated to receive $409 million annually from the BFP pot alone, and an additional $15 million for carbon reduction, $56 million for PROTECT, and $26 million for EV charging, for a total of more than $540 million. Totals for the PROTECT and carbon reduction programs will increase in each fiscal year through 2026. Because Congress did not pass the federal spending bill until March, and funded the government at existing levels until that point, the state may receive slightly less in federal fiscal year 22 than USDOT originally projected. Ultimately, the state has broad discretion over how much of this new funding will flow to New York City. Given FHWA's guidance calling on state DOTs to share funds with local governments and the city's significant infrastructure needs, we urge the state to share a portion of all formula programs with local governments. New York State typically allocates 30% of formula funds to New York City, with 15% going towards state assets like state highways that NYSDOT is responsible for, and 15% to city assets, our streets and bridges. We suggest that this formula be applied to these new programs. Timely guidance on how the state intends to share these funds will also help the city to plan effectively for the future. If shared with the city, these funds would help us adapt our transportation infrastructure in the face of the climate crisis by accelerating the transition to clean electric vehicles, expanding options for walking and biking, improving bus service, and integrating resiliency features into all of our capital projects. These funds would also help us to maintain our vast inventory of infrastructure in a state of good repair, including our 789 bridges and tunnels and 6,300 miles of streets. Sharing these funds will also benefit the state by helping it to achieve its expansive climate goals and by supporting the recovery of the city's economy, the economic engine of New York State. My testimony also includes a table outlining these amounts. Now turning to discretionary funding. The amount for which New York City DOT can compete has approximately doubled to over 10 billion annually across more than 30 discretionary programs. Most are specific to certain types of projects, such as bridges or freight. The large majority of award opportunities are small, in the range of 5 million, or medium-sized, up to 25 million, with a handful of large award programs. To maximize our chances of securing discretionary funds, we are closely tracking the release of grant applications, coordinating with OMB and our agency partners, and identifying a pipeline of competitive projects to match each grant opportunity. These candidates are screened to ensure that they meet US DOT requirements. We are also happy to talk with members of the council about projects they are interested in advancing. For capital funding, projects often must be far along in the development process, referred to as shovel-ready, as well as advance the Biden administration's goals, referred to as shovel-worthy. These goals include building a stronger and fairer economy, combating climate change, addressing racial inequities and underinvestment, and improving mobility, access, and safety. We are cautiously optimistic on our chances as these goals align closely with the Adams administration's top transportation priorities. Our work to pursue these funds is well underway. New York City just submitted 2 applications for this year's Rebuilding American Infrastructure and Sustainability and Equity, or RAISE program, for which the bill increased annual funding from $1 billion to $1.5 billion. We are requesting $17 million for capital improvements to the B82 bus route in southern Brooklyn. This project includes a suite of safety, bus, quality of life improvements. Both B82 riders and local residents will benefit, including those living in historically disadvantaged neighborhoods on the eastern end of the corridor. And we are also requesting $7.25 million for a planning grant to fund Filling the Gaps, New York City's Greenway expansion plan. This effort is a collaboration between DOT, Parks, and EDC. The project will develop a plan to expand open space and greenway connections across the 5 boroughs, particularly within low and moderate income communities. New York City is also seeking federal funds to repair the damage caused by urban highways that divide Black and brown neighborhoods, a key priority of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Last year, New York City DOT secured a $2 million RAISE planning grant to reimagine the Cross Bronx Expressway in partnership with New York State DOT, which owns the expressway, and the New York City Department of City Planning. And New York City hopes to secure part of the $1 billion available under the new Reconnecting Communities pilot program to mitigate highways that create barriers between communities, reduce access to jobs, and contribute to air pollution. To implement Electrifying New York, our vision to dramatically expand publicly accessible electric vehicle charging, we plan to apply to the newly created Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, which will distribute $2.5 billion in grants over 5 years. This will enable our agency to expand public EV charging in neighborhoods currently overlooked by private charging companies. Of the formula money New York State is receiving, the state is allocating $3.6 billion for competitive grant opportunities and state priority projects. And we will aggressively pursue those competitive programs. The state may be reserving as much as $1 to $2 billion for significant projects, which it will select. We hope to work with the state to dedicate a portion of this money to fund a major New York City project, such as the reconstruction of the BQE, a project that has regional and statewide importance. While we are grateful for the resources provided in the BIL, it's important to note that the current process for using federal funds is a complex one. Our goal is to maximize federal funding by targeting these dollars to projects that are best suited to receive them. With the encouragement of FHWA, NYC DOT's strategy is to place large chunks of federal funds on a smaller number of big projects. We can then shift city dollars from these large capital projects to other projects that are less well suited for federal funding. NYC DOT is encouraged by the openness of US DOT leadership to discussing ways to make federal funds easier for local governments to use. Our top priorities include right-sizing the level of oversight necessary for different types of projects, delegating more authority to local transportation departments for making routine determinations, and exploring project delivery changes to shorten the implementation timeline for smaller federally funded projects. In terms of benefits of the BIL to New York City, I would be remiss not to mention other transportation funding that is coming to the 5 boroughs. Our partners at the MTA are slated to receive billions in federal support for the modernization of our transit system, the backbone of our transportation network. The Federal Transit Administration recently announced an initial grant of $400 million for the 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2 project and a first installment of $100 million for the Gateway project, the most critical rail project in the nation. And in the upcoming federal fiscal year 23 budget process, New York City will advocate for further transportation funding increases, working with our congressional delegation. Earlier, I mentioned that most, but not all, of the new programs or increased funding levels established in the BIL were fully funded in the law. For example, the new Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program was authorized, but not funded, to provide up to $200 million annually in grants for bike and pedestrian projects, a good fit for much of our agency's work. So we hope that in fiscal year 23 and beyond, Congress will fully fund these and other programs. Looking beyond the BIL, if Democrats in Congress revive some of their climate provisions in a renewed reconciliation effort, several of those proposals could provide additional funding. And lastly, our members of Congress are currently in the process of determining which projects they will submit for member requested funding, process which is subject to strict transparency and accountability rules. We have provided our delegation members with information on worthy transportation projects in their district. Now, turning finally to the topic of infrastructure and resiliency, the BIL adds resiliency improvements to the allowable uses of the National Highway Performance Program, the single largest source of federal highway formula funding. It creates the PROTECT grant program and provides $7.3 billion in formula funds and $1.4 billion in competitive grants over 5 years. This new funding and flexibility will help us to advance our resiliency efforts. Further feedback from the state on how it intends to distribute these funds will help us more effectively plan our resiliency projects. Following the passage of Local Law 41 in 2021, DOT now uses forward-looking climate data to evaluate resiliency elements for our capital project scopes. While currently in the pilot phase, this approach will expand to all capital projects over $10 million in 2026. In our street reconstruction program, we are working with the Department of Design and Construction to review all new projects using a resiliency scoring framework with the goal of including as many climate hazard mitigations as feasible. The DOT Bridge program is also using this scoring framework in the scoping and design of its major projects. In addition, as part of the new Unified Stormwater Rule, we are working with DEP and DDC to manage more stormwater through practices like porous pavement and bioswales. In partnership with City Hall, DEP, parks, and others, we are also exploring ways to manage stormwater beyond typical rain events through the newly funded Cloudburst program, where initial studies are already underway. In addition to its own projects, NYC DOT plays an important role in supporting large interagency coastal flood protection projects. These projects, generally coordinated through MOCEJ, protect an entire area or neighborhood. Large-scale interagency projects usually involve at least some streets under our jurisdiction, and our agency works closely with the project team. NYC DOT is also responsible for critical operational activities on certain projects, including the maintenance and operation of deployable floodgates. My testimony includes a list of the large-scale resiliency planning efforts that we are involved in. In an effort to develop a pipeline of more DOT-initiated projects to address climate hazards, DOT recently secured 2 planning grants. Cool Corridors is the first ever heat mitigation proposal funded by FEMA's BRIC program to develop design guidelines and a benefit cost methodology for heat resiliency in the right-of-way. In addition, as part of the local waterfront revitalization program, DOT received funding to develop strategies and a design toolkit to address long-term adaptation to sea level rise for waterfront street ends. In conclusion, I would like to thank the committees for the opportunity to testify today about the possibilities of increased federal funding, as well as our agency's role in resiliency. We would be happy now to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'll now turn it over to questions from Chair Brooks Powers, who will be followed by Chair Kagan. Panelists, unless there is background audio, please stay unmuted if possible to facilitate the question and answer period. Thank you. Chair Brooks Powers.
Thank you. And you set out a significant amount of information for the committee to review. But I want to ask you now about some of the key elements that matter most to the committee. So I want to start off with focusing on the DOT and federal funding. So several pathways exist for federal infrastructure funding to be used for city projects. Some federal funds will flow to the city through New York State DOT, the Port Authority, and the MTA, and some funding will be appropriated directly or through competitive grant programs. Given the multiple avenues for funding projects and the various agencies involved, how is DOT planning with regard to the entire universe of funding streams available for infrastructure projects?
Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers. We agree that in order to be successful in securing as much BIL funding as possible, we need to be extremely organized. That is why at the agency level, we have convened a working group that is tracking over 30 discretionary funding opportunities and identifying what the requirements for those opportunities are and potential projects that are in our capital program that may be good candidates. On the formula side, my colleague Yogesh is coordinating closely with the state as they share details with us about what our share of the large formula pots will be. In addition, as Executive Director Charles Guzman mentioned, we are working closely with OMB and with our partner agencies to discuss new grant opportunities to collaborate on applications and the city's overall grant strategy.
Thank you. And before I go any further, I'd like to also acknowledge that we've been joined by Council Members Stevens and Williams. I also wanted to touch on a piece that was raised in the first testimony in terms of the policy coordination. And I think it ties into the question that I just asked. So I want to understand what that coordination looks like and how we're able to maximize how we go after these dollars from a policy perspective as well. And if that's in coordination with DOT also.
Thank you for that question. I'll just jump in really quickly to say that, just reiterate that we completely agree that we have got to stay organized and we have got to stay in close conversation with our partner agencies. So again, we are being coordinated through the Deputy Mayor for Operations and OMB. We've been having a lot of conversations across these city agencies, including our office, the Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. And again, trying to really assess and align our city priorities and troubleshoot those challenges, right? So that we can use everyone's lessons learned. All of these different pots of funding might flow through different agencies, have their own set of lessons learned. And we want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward there.
And
So that means, I'm sorry, I was just gonna ask, so does that mean that the meetings are already happening?
Yes, we are internally meeting, absolutely.
Okay.
And Chair, just a quick example of this would be our recent RAISE application for expanding the Greenway network, which came about because Parks, EDC, and DOT were talking very early on in the process. We all have an interest in greenways, and then we were able to quickly come together and develop what we think is a very strong proposal.
Thank you for that. And what is DOT doing now to coordinate with other agencies and levels of government to advance the city's infrastructure priorities with regard to the use of federal funds? So I hear on the policy side, but specifically with DOT, how are you coordinating, like with the state DOT, MTA, Port Authority? What does that look like?
As I mentioned in the testimony, we've received from state DOT our initial allotment of I believe it's 193 million, Yogesh, a year. We are still waiting to hear further details from the state as to how they plan to distribute the new program pots that are in the BIL, and would welcome the help of the council in encouraging the state to provide that information and to share that funding, so that we can begin planning and seeing how we can make use of those funds to advance taking care of our infrastructure, or advancing equity, and all those other opportunities. That's us in this state. Yes, Chair?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were.
And then in terms of the MTA, we have a long-standing partnership with them regarding our bus program. We often support each other's grant applications when it relates to projects to try to improve the reliability and speed of bus service. And we are planning to, I believe, submit a grant around that in response to the bus and bus facilities grant opportunity, which was recently released.
And with that grant opportunity, will it also include some of the dollars from the National Electrification Vehicle program? Will some of the dollars come from there too?
I believe that MTA, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe they will be going after significant new money for electric buses that's in the BIL. The project that we're looking at, I think, is more focused on-street improvements to improve bus stations, the pedestrian environment, and to create higher quality bus lanes. We do have an interest also in going for a share of the $2.5 billion in new discretionary grant opportunities for electric vehicle charging to expand public charging citywide, particularly to those neighborhoods that the private sector is not investing in right now.
Yeah, I definitely think if the money is there for the electrification of our buses, we should explore it. I know in Councilmember Narcisse's district, she has a bus depot there that currently is not an electrifying bus depot, but seeing those investments, I think, goes a long way in terms of the health and well-being of the community as well. Okay, so when you talk about the 193 million that you've received so far from the state Department of Transportation, how has that funding been used so far?
I'm going to turn to my colleague Yogesh Sanghvi, who can talk a little bit about the information we've received from the state so far on our allocation.
Oh, hi, thank you, Bill. So far, the state has estimated, getting $10.5 billion in bill funding. And what they have done as a first allotment, as Bill Carey mentioned, is to allocate to all the regions in the state. New York City's allocation is $193 million per year. And over the 5 years, they have given us $868 million. So this is a usual process that we have had in place for many, many years, where this allocation is to be used to identify projects that are eligible and placed on a financial planning document as required by federal law. And this financial planning document is called TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. So that we have just begun that process through the Metropolitan Planning Organization to identify projects that are eligible by the fiscal year in which the funding is given. So that's what we have just begun now.
And thank you for that. And I would definitely implore the Department of Transportation to make sure that when the money is being spent down, it's being used through the lens of equity. Looking at communities that have, as I said in my opening remarks, have largely been disinvested in. Now that we have this increase in funding, it's like this meme that floats around from time to time that shows, the difference in what equity versus like equality may look like. So you want to make sure that you're bringing up the communities to match the communities that have been a long time invested in. And I think it's important that as the money is coming in, that we have a commitment from the Department of Transportation that they will prioritize the communities that, based on data and facts that they see, have not been invested in for many years. So I would love to have a commitment from the Department of Transportation on that.
Chair Brooks Powers, Mayor Adams and Commissioner Rodriguez have made equity one of the key priorities for our transportation policy. And we wholeheartedly endorse the idea of focusing new resources on communities that have previously seen less investment in the past, and look forward to working with you on those efforts.
Thank you. And then which grant programs funded through the IIJA does DOT plan to apply for, and for which projects?
So, Chair, there are, and we can provide you with a list. There are some 34 different grant opportunities that we are currently tracking. And I won't read them all, but I can just call a couple of them out. There's RAISE, which is $7.5 billion in total nationally. There's INFRA, the National Significant Freight and Highway Project, which is $7.2 billion. There's the Safe Street and Roads for All, which is $6 billion. There's a huge bridge program called the Bridge Investment Program, which is $12.2 billion. And the list goes on and on. So we are focused on identifying potential candidates for all of these, and would be happy to provide further information.
Can you provide that list to the members of the committee?
The
so
list
that we
of
can,
the
34.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you. And I'm glad to hear the Bridge Investment Program on there, because I know, for example, in my district, we have a roadway called Brookville Boulevard that we call the Snake Road that needs to be raised. It's a major artery into JFK. It has chronic flooding. It's in the protected marshlands and would require cooperation with the federal, state, and city. And I would love for that road to be considered as you're looking at the projects for that particular grant.
Leslie, do you want to talk a little bit about our thoughts on Snake Road?
Sure. We are quite aware of the conditions of Brookville Boulevard. And I will happy to report that we're having active conversations with our partner agencies, particularly parks, because as you know, this road goes through parkland, and most of the parkland there is a tidal wetland. So it's a unique situation, and we are exploring funding options, including federal funding opportunities to study the condition of Brookville Boulevard and figure out ways to mitigate flooding in this area. We'd be happy to reach out to, the community and the electeds in the area to further discuss our thoughts on this.
I'm glad to hear that you all are actively looking at it, and I would love to facilitate a meeting with you and the local elected officials and community stakeholders on that. You should also know that there's been a study on Snake Road also that I can provide to you after this hearing. So just kind of pick up and make sure we all have the same information to work from.
That sounds good, and we can continue having this important conversation.
Thank you.
Chair, if you wanted to have Cindy send that to me, I can share with the team.
Absolutely. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, Rebecca. How will federal funds be utilized for projects that improve street safety?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Safety and Vision Zero is one of the main focuses of DOT and the Adams administration, and it is also one of the new and main focuses of the Biden administration and the BIL. And we are excited that there are new funding opportunities in the BIL, including the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, a national competitive grant program that we believe we will be very competitive for, and that we will seek to fund, to use to fund some of our street safety projects. Yogesh, are there other pots in the bill that are worth mentioning in terms of safety?
Yes. So there is another source called Highway Safety Improvement Program. And from the allocations that I earlier mentioned to you, that the state has given us an initial allocation of $868 million. Of that, 40 million is under this HSIP funding that I just described. Now, this is funding that specifically requires the primary objective to be safety improvements, but it has to be data-driven and analysis done to show why it is improving safety. So this HSIP funding is an important source for safety improvements. I'm sorry, is it me with the noise or somebody else?
No, I actually think that's the assistant commissioner's background.
Okay.
But thank you. How is DOT ensuring that the funds are distributed in ways, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of advancing equity, reflecting the commitment that you said the mayor and the commissioner wholeheartedly stands behind Assistant Commissioner Carey?
Thank you for the question, Chair. And yes, again, our agency and the city is committed to equity as a core value. As you may have seen in our recently released streets plan, one of the things we did in that plan was to identify priority investment areas, or PIAs, and these areas were specifically chosen based on several metrics, including race, income, as well as historic underinvestment. So we will be using those PIAs not just for our in-house projects, but as a guide to our overall efforts to redesign and improve our streets. So I think that plan is a key part of our sort of approach to equity.
I appreciate, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So sorry, Chair, if I could also jump in here for a second, just to reiterate that the Adams administration, and you've heard the mayor say this from the campaign years, that he is firmly committed to investing in the outer boroughs and specifically in historically underserved neighborhoods. Again, the fact that we used to be 4 different offices focused on climate action and environmental sustainability issues, and now we are one team, and our mandate is to ensure that we're addressing environmental justice, only speaks to the mayor's commitment on this topic. And so we're also delighted that the BIL is also very specifically prioritizing investments in environmental justice communities, right? So it sounds like our focus on equity and resiliency and equity is also the Biden administration's focus. So I do think our applications will be very competitive in this process because I think that we share similar goals.
Thank you for that. Now, what commitments will DOT adhere to regarding the use of MWBEs in infrastructure projects?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Building on our previous answer, again, I think our commitment to equity also extends to creating as many business opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses, and that will be a major focus of ours when it comes to spending money from the BIL. And Yogesh can talk a little bit about how WMBE interacts with the federal BIL requirements.
Thank you, Chair. So the use of federal funding actually requires the contractor, the primary contractor, to identify disadvantaged business enterprises, which sort of meets a very similar goal as the MWBE. So the use of federal funding just changes the requirement a little bit, but the requirement is still there.
And how will the Department of Transportation engage local communities so that they're able to, lift their voices with regard to how the federal infrastructure funding is to be used? Has DOT thought about doing like community visioning or anything in that regards?
The agency did, thank you for the question, Chair. The agency did a substantial amount of outreach for the streets plan, again, which we released in December of last year, and solicited input from communities across the city through a variety of means to, get their input on what folks saw as their their main transportation concerns and preferences for their communities. So I think that for us will be an important resource. Whenever we do any project, that project, capital project or an in-house project, will include a robust public engagement process through which we can make the project better and ensure that local input is incorporated, and we would certainly be open to discussing with you ideas for how to sort of further engage at the citywide level regarding the opportunities in BIL.
And is the administration planning to track the use of federal funds across the city agencies? I know, for example, the city comptroller created like a checkbook on tracking federal dollars, but does the administration plan to track the use of federal funds across the agencies?
If I can turn this question over to Katie Schmidt, who needs to be unmuted.
Thank you, Kizzy. And thank you, Council Member. So as both my Executive Director and DOT said, we are still waiting for a lot of the guidance with regard to the grant programs funded in the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as decisions about the formula funding. And I think receiving that guidance and starting to submit applications is the first step in the process. most of the time in our past experience with federal grants, from the release of the notice of funding opportunity by the federal agency through actually securing the money is a months-long process. And so I think we will work with OMB and City Hall to think about how best to track the receipt of federal grants and spend down of those federal grants, and can return to talk about that at a future time. But right now our focus is really on understanding the funding available as information comes out and going after that funding. I'd also like to point the council to OMB's Sandy funding tracker. So this was a public tracker that was set up to track and communicate how we were spending down Sandy funds received for resiliency projects. So I do think there are examples out there that we can look to and continue to talk about that.
Thank you for that. DOT previously indicated that it would utilize funding to protect streets and bridges against storm surge and extreme precipitation. What concrete steps will DOT take to do this?
Leslie, can you talk a little bit about how we are integrating resiliency into our design scoping process?
Yes, thanks, Will. As previously mentioned, Local Law 41, the Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines, which is in a pilot phase right now, it puts together a screening framework to assess the climate risks for different areas, different projects, and then determines what the climate risks are, whether they be heat, whether they be precipitation, or whether they be sea level rise. And depending on the scores that are derived from this screening process, then we try to integrate and embed design, resiliency measures within the scopes of these projects in order to deal with those types of climate risks. So this is, as was mentioned, this is being done in a pilot phase right now on, I believe, 40 projects across the city. DOT is has a number of projects in that pilot phase. And we will be, and what we are doing now above and beyond the pilot period is applying this screening to all of our, just about all of our projects in our capital plan to better understand where the risks are and what kind of, toolbox we can use and integrate into these projects.
And Leslie, that includes our colleagues in the Bridges Division?
Yes, so we're doing this. It actually, yes, it includes the streets program. The Bridges program actually has a specific pilot project in this program, and they are going to apply it throughout their plan. And we're also actually, our facilities folks as well are using this screening method and are part of this pilot project.
Thank you for that. I'm going to quickly pivot to alternative transportation before I free it up for Chair Kagan. So what is DOT's current plan to expand access to alternative modes of transportation available to communities underserved by transit?
Thank you for the question, Chair. DOT is one of our sort of core missions, is always looking at ways to expand transportation alternatives, particularly to areas underserved by transit. And I'll call out a couple major efforts that we have. One is our partnership with the MTA to improve bus service. And I mentioned the federal grant that we're applying for the South Brooklyn SBS. I think, as folks know, in South Brooklyn, the subway lines pretty much go north-south, and there's no east-west connectivity. So what this line does is it enables people to have that east-west connectivity, to be able to access more of those subway lines. And we continue to have commitments to expand bus priority across the city, with a particular focus on areas where there's a longer distance from the subway. The second thing I wanted to mention in terms of expanding transportation options is the expansion of micromobility. So earlier this spring, we announced that as part of our East Bronx scooter share program, we were doubling the size of that area, which will, also provide folks with more options. Again, that's an area where subway lines are mainly north-south, and or areas are just not served by the subway at all. And so we think that's a promising model to provide, another option is e-scooters. And then, the final is that, with City Bike, we continue to be in the third phase of major expansion. We've brought City Bike to a huge portion of the Bronx. Almost the entirety of the South Bronx are going deeper into Queens and deeper into Brooklyn. And we're also, of course, looking to make key investments in expanding the bike network in our priority investment areas, as I mentioned in our streets plan, many of which are either beyond the reach of the subway system or located in areas where subway stops are much further, subway lines are much further from each other.
Thank you for that. And I think it's important. When I think about transit deserts, I think even beyond my own districts, like in Councilmember Velasquez's district in the Bronx, or Councilmember Lee in Queens, also that's heavily reliant on buses, wanting to do outreach in those communities, I think would be helpful from DOT also, to make sure that those communities are not overlooked as well. Because with my transportation tour, I've been looking at where, I see some of the need also in areas that could use some greater love from the Department of Transportation and MTA as well. And I will end with my questions in this round and say, I would love to see the Department of Transportation speed up the way they handle requests, particularly from transit desert communities. So I know with my office, we put in a request for a speed bump about a year ago that we're still waiting on. And it was interesting because in talking to my staff who deals with DOT, the going phrase is it normally takes sometimes years for a speed bump to be installed. Also a turn-in signal, we met with Commissioner Garcia back in November of last year, and then this year with the commissioner, and still waiting on resolution there. And so when we have unsafe streets and the increase in traffic fatalities, I think Transportation Alternative is putting out a more recent report in terms of how deadly the year has been so far. Wanting to see these I call low-hanging fruit investments just taken on a bit more quickly from the Department of Transportation. So I'm not sure what we can do to kind of speed up these processes, but I think it's very important. And I would love to see a quicker resolution. I mean, I'm the chair of Transportation and Infrastructure, and I'm still feeling like it's taken a long time to get resolution for a lot of these areas that I feel the agency can respond to much more quickly. And so I would love to get a commitment from DOT that not only in my district, but in my colleagues' district with these type of requests, that will be safety measures will be escalated or carried out much more quickly than they have been.
Thanks so much, Chair. I appreciate that you flagging that. And then the left turn, I was actually got an email from the Deputy Commissioner who was on the walkthrough when we met in February. So I'm expecting to have an update for you very soon. I think one thing to keep in mind is that we're also trying to work through a backlog of, there was a pause during COVID and we're trying to catch up, and speed bumps is kind of a victim of that, but hear you loud and clear. And, we also have issues with, people have left city service and things are, trying to staff up. There's, people have left, there's been a lot of people who've made changes in their careers during this COVID time. So completely hear you. And I'm hoping to have more information for you and for Sydney this week on the left turn.
Thank you. Look forward to hearing back on that. And with that, I will pass it over to Chair Kagan.
Thank you so much, Chair Brooks Powers. I have a few questions to ask. So one question I would like to ask is regarding federal funding for a famous Coney Island Riggleman Boardwalk. So does city administration plan to apply for federal funding? Because we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars for the restoration of this boardwalk, which is basically at this point completely broken and requires massive investments that would be much easier to get from federal funding. It's parts of infrastructure, parts of economic development, partially transportation, partially parks, partially just fame of New York City and fame of Southern Brooklyn. It's not just Coney Island. I've heard about this famous boardwalk while I was living more than 30 years ago in Belarus, so that's part of the New York fabric. So do you expect to even apply for this federal funding for the restoration of Coney Island Boardwalk?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Kagan, and it's nice to see you again. Just to reiterate that, our office's role is to provide that policy guidance to ensure that the agency projects are built resiliently and sustainably. And this is why we've covered today the resiliency design guidelines as an example of how we're doing that. We are absolutely happy to follow up with the Parks Department on the specific issue as they can provide more detail in response to your question, and I'm happy to get back to you on this.
Thank you. Also, during the entire hearing now and in my previous hearing together with Fire Prevention and Emergency Management Committee, we talked about resiliency, but also I would like to emphasize that all federal funding and city funding and state funding, all resiliency measures should go hand to hand together with making our city also accessible to everyone.
Absolutely.
And it's relevant to our conversation today. I did not hear anybody even mentioning word accessibility, but when we talk about, for example, DOT or any kind of other improvements in New York City, every part of our beloved city should be accessible for all people. Right now we have on our virtual meeting two great disability advocates, Deborah and Chris Greif. They're fighting this fight for many, many years, and they're not alone. And I would like to hear even word accessible. I did not hear it today so far, especially from DOT folks when they talked about bus improvements and bus lines improvements. In many places, it's still not accessible. And I know how people complaining to me, sending emails about it. So I would like each agency representative to mention that you know about this issue and care about it at least.
Chair Kagan, thank you so much for the question. And yes, if I was remiss in mentioning it, let me correct that now. DOT and the administration are committed to making our transportation and our street networks accessible to all New Yorkers, regardless of level of ability. There are a couple of projects that immediately come to mind. We have a couple projects in the pipeline to address specifically bus accessibility, particularly at bus stops that are located under elevated structures, where the bus sort of needs to stop in the center of the road, and someone who's using a wheelchair therefore does not have easy access to the ramp. And we are looking at other projects, and Leslie, maybe you'd like to chime in here, where we're looking at bus stops that don't have adequate ramps and sidewalks.
Yes, thank you, Will. Yeah, I mean, our accessibility efforts are vast and varied. Will mentioned a few of them. We are, as you're probably aware, we have we're putting accessible ped ramps all over the city at a very expedient pace. We're putting in APS signals for those that are need those type of devices in order to safely cross the streets. We are actively expanding our raised crosswalks initiatives and programs in order for those people to be able to cross intersections safely without having to deal with grade issues. I would also say that we are actively working with our partners at the MTA and have I think an expanded coordination effort as it relates to their program to put in elevators into their stations throughout the city. They've expanded their program greatly, and we're working very closely with them on the on-street kind of accessible path routes and how we can work together and work smarter to make the roadway and getting into the subway system safer. I think those are just a few of the ways that we're addressing accessibility.
I just like to emphasize, for example, we have a Coney Island Hospital in Southern Brooklyn, major health institution, and when people with disabilities are leaving or getting into, it's a huge mess at the entrance. It's a bus stop there. It's all DOT, and the people, I'm getting complaints all the time. People cannot get access to the bus stop very, very often. I cannot call police precinct for this. I believe DOT should also be involved in this because it's a major issue, especially for people with disabilities who are leaving main entrance of Coney Island Hospital and trying to get onto a public bus on Ocean Parkway I'm talking about. So another issue I would like to mention is the street lights. It was brought to my attention, particularly in Coney Island, but I realize it's a problem all over the city of New York. So could DOT tell me that how do you decide what areas need street lights? Is it like concentrated in high crime areas, or it's any other reasons where exactly street lights? It's a big issue for Coney Island. It's a big issue for Boardwalk. It's a big issue for a lot of areas in Southern Brooklyn and outside of Southern Brooklyn. Street lights, I believe, in many places of New York City, I see street lights are on at noon, and I don't see street lights are on in the evening. So we have to be paying much more attention to our street lights infrastructure and maybe use federal funding for it.
Thank you for the question, Chair. We are committed to maintaining all of our assets in a state of good repair, and that includes our streetlights, because, as you say, they're so important both for travel safety, but as well as for people's general sense of safety when they're walking around at night. I'm looking to my colleagues to see if they have additional information that we can provide you with now.
Councilmember, I was going to say, if you have particular locations in your district, that please send them to, you can send them to me, or you can send them to the Brooklyn office. I'm happy to look at that. I would say generally overall, we have a standard for lighting that we have across the city, but we could also set up a separate call with you if you want to have a conversation with our lighting folks to get a better understanding of it as well. But if there's particular locations in your district where streetlights are out, either you can call 311, and if you want to send them to us with 311 numbers, we can follow up with the lighting division. Because there's Con Ed has a role here. There's a few steps to it, but happy to set something up to give you more information if that's something you want.
So you're saying the city does have enough funds right now to cover all needs for streetlights anywhere in the city of New York? You don't need any kind of federal funding for it?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I think we're going to have to follow up with you on that specific question for the lighting.
Okay, one more question related to catch basins. That's probably GEP question. So how many catch basins we have in New York City? I've heard before the number that we need $7 billion from federal or state government to maintain and inspect and to repair all catch basins. So what is the situation today with catch basins in New York City? It's a very important issue. And again, sometimes you don't need even Superstorm Sandy, or you don't need even Superstorm Ida. You need like just heavy rain, and it's already a problem. So what is the current situation and how much money do we need? I've heard before the number $7 billion, and if that's the number, can we apply for federal funding to make sure that we're ready for the next storm, heavy rain, flooding, superstorm, etc.?
Derek Kagan, thank you for the question. Yeah, there are about 150,000 catch basins in New York City. We inspect and maintain them, as required. It's always a challenge. We were happy to hear yesterday that twice a week street sweeping was reinstated because trash on basins and in basins has been a concern for us. So we're happy about that. We've done, I think, in the past few years, a really good job getting some of the basins that had been deteriorated back into a state of good repair. The $7 billion number, I don't know where it came from, but certainly with the federal infrastructure funding for drainage, we certainly want to make the best use of it, and we do have a list of projects for drainage in the city.
Thank you. So, and last question again to Department of Transportation. I noticed in your presentation and testimony that you already applied for $17 million to improve specifically B82 line in Southern Brooklyn, which I'm very happy about. What about B1 and B36, also in Southern Brooklyn, buses that are like heavily used, and I see a lot of needs on so-called infrastructure over these lines.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. Well, the Adams administration and Commissioner Rodriguez are committed to making buses more reliable, faster, in partnership with the MTA. We're working with them as they do a borough by borough exercise to completely take a fresh look at the bus networks in each borough. I believe that's happened in the Bronx. It's happening now in Queens, and will then be happening in Brooklyn. Rebecca, do you have anything further to add on that?
No,
front?
I think you said it perfectly. And then we're happy to share that. I don't know if you've had any recent conversations with the MTA, Chair Kagan, or if you've voiced your desire to have more improvements on those lines, but we're happy to send that message too.
Okay. And the last question.
And did you say B1 and B36?
B1 and B36.
Thank you.
B1 and B36.
Thank you.
Because I noticed that you did require $17 million for B82 for Southern Brooklyn. So
we had installed an operational project on that corridor. So this is to build it out capitally.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned B1 and B36. Yep. And the last question, also related to the last statements of my co-chair, Councilwoman Brooks Powers. Brooks Powers, regarding timeline for DOT coming back to our areas. There is a rule right now about 36 months minimum period until the next traffic study. And since I worked before for my predecessor, then Council Member Mark Traeger, and that request was made, but then we were told 36 months to wait. I'm talking specifically about crosswalk at West 37th Street and Surf Avenue, where the senior housing development people, seniors and people with disabilities asking for years, not for months, for years, to have any kind of crosswalk, and every time wait for another traffic study. And the last response was, we need to wait for 36 months. Do we need to pass a law by New York City Council so that every time traffic study is done, the next traffic study on that corner should be done not in the next 36 months, but in 18 months or 12 months, because we're basically waiting for a death on that particular crossing, that some senior would be dead because it's a last stop of the bus, and cars are going inside Seagate, and it's only 99% seniors and people with disabilities who are crossing the Surf Avenue on that corner, West 37, and they're begging us for many, many years for any kind of crosswalk or stop sign or anything. And answer is always no. And now answer is wait for 36 months, then we will do another traffic study. So should we change it legislatively? Because waiting for 36 months until someone is dead is unacceptable.
So the city has almost 14,000 signalized intersections in the city, and we get, I would say that since the start of Vision Zero, I think our requests for signal studies and all-way stop signs, I believe I have this right, has increased 20 to 30%. And so we have an enormous, and we're also trying to focus on areas where priority areas where we're seeing the largest number of crashes and fatalities and injuries happening. I will check with our signals division and our markings division about this particular location and get back to you.
Thank you so much. Now I will go back to our co-chair, Selvina Brooks-Power. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for that. And I am now going to pass it over for questions from my colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. I will now call on council members in the order that they've used the Zoom raise hand function. If you would like to ask a question and you have not yet used the Zoom raise hand function, please raise it now. Council members, keep your questions to 5 minutes. The Sergeant at Arms will keep a timer and I will let you know when your time is up. You should begin once I've called on you and the Sergeant has announced that you may begin before delivering your testimony. First, we'll hear from Councilmember Rivera, who will be followed by Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Rivera.
Starting time.
Thank you so much to the chairs. Thank you to the administration for being here. So as part of the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project, the city committed to conduct a study to investigate options for greening the areas along the at-grade portion of the FDR Drive in the Lower East Side from approximately Montgomery Street to East 14th Street. The goal of the study is to analyze the existing conditions to inform recommendations for increasing sustainability and resiliency in the area and of the FDR Drive itself, building on the open space and waterfront connectivity improvements of the ESCR project while working to reduce the city's climate impact. Can you share an update on this study and how can the City Council be helpful here?
Thank you for your question. Just to get you up to date on the status, Parks and DOT in collaboration with the Parks Department is working on scoping for the study that you've mentioned and is aiming to get an RFP out this spring. So in fairly short order, we hope to finalize the scope of work, get it out for award to begin the study. Generally, we're looking to include in the scope robust community engagement and developing concepts that will build upon open space and waterfront connectivity improvements that are currently a part of ESCR. I think once we like I said, we're going to have a very, as part of this study, we're going to have a very active outreach and community involvement process. And as part of that, obviously, we'll be reaching out to you and others to make sure that this study has the elements that the community is looking for, and we can come up with a deliverable that is useful and has utility and identifies ways to improve accessibility, connectivity, building upon those things that are part of the ESCR project currently.
All right, well, I mean, I appreciate that. Please let us know how we can be helpful. I think the communication piece is pretty significant in terms of the community engagement. I think that people there's a lot of misinformation about the project and what we want to do. So I'm looking forward to working with you on that. And the question, with the time that I have, is on greenways. So the city last issued a greenway plan in 1993 under Mayor Dinkins, but 30 years later, much of our city's 100 miles of greenways still only exist on paper. And, greenways can create and extend healthy open spaces into every corner of the city. It can aid with social distancing, greenway construction, and upgrades will also create jobs that can take advantage of new federal funding infrastructure, federal infrastructure money. And they will safely support booming bike use in the city for many types of trips and for people of all ages and abilities. So much like other forms of infrastructure being discussed today, low-income neighborhoods and communities of color have seen the least investment for greenway infrastructure to date. And I know you've also mentioned that you're focused on this equity piece and really making sure we're uplifting and supporting as much as we can community-led development, as well as communities that have been disproportionately underinvested. So how does the city currently identify repairs and engineering solutions to common problems like tree root upheaval and very aged greenway infrastructure? And what are the challenges that DOT currently faces when seeking to communicate and collaborate with parks, with DDC, with EDC, with DEP, and other relevant jurisdictions, such as the New York State Department of Transportation, the Metropolitan, the MTA, and of course, greenway-specific institutions such as the Hudson River Park Trust. So if you could just answer those two for me, how do you currently identify repairs and engineering solutions, especially in infrastructure that's aging? And so what are some of the challenges with that interagency communication, especially on different levels of government?
Thank you, Council Member, for the question. We too are huge fans of greenways and their myriad benefits, and we too believe that in line with the administration's priorities are really looking to expand greenways further into the boroughs, particularly into neighborhoods that have historically been underserved. And that's really the purpose of this money that we're going for through the RAISE program this year. The $7.25 million will enable us to identify gaps in the network where we can work to identify specific places where we want to develop detailed plans for greenways. And this is again a collaboration between DOT, EDC, and parks, as well as look at older greenway segments that may need work. And I think this kind of builds on a successful collaboration that the three agencies had around the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway in identifying, and that work is obviously still ongoing, but kind of systematically identifying the gaps and coming up with plans and working with the relevant communities to further develop those plans. And we plan to replicate that process with a real focus on the outer boroughs. I also just want to mention, and perhaps Leslie, if you want to chime in here, that we're starting construction soon on two parts of the Jamaica Bay Greenway at the Canarsie Pier and Pendergast Avenue.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Will. I mean, I just want to re-emphasize, I think the point the council member brought up is coordination and collaboration. A lot of these facilities, these greenways, like you said, as you aptly pointed out, they cross agency jurisdictional issues. The Parks Department has, they have greenways running through parkland, which we're trying to work together with them as they connect to the street network and so forth, and issues having to do with DEP and drainage and all these different issues we all have to work together to be able to plan better and to build better, to make a network that's rational and that's it's connected and it's contiguous. So we continue to do that, and as we've mentioned, we have the RAISE grant that we put in last week to look at the Greenway network throughout the city. So we're excited that that there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm across our sister agencies to tackle this very important, I would say, quote unquote, alternative transportation mode.
Agreed. Thank you so much. I know greenways have the potential to be so much more than what we've seen. So I'm looking forward to implementing that as urgently as possible. Thank you to the chairs for the time. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Lee, who will be followed by Councilmember Carr. Councilmember Lee.
Starting time.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Majority Whip Chair Brooks Powers, as well as Chair Kagan. And I had two questions. Now it's down to one, because thank you, Councilmember Rivera, for asking that question on the greenways, because I also have a big chunk of the greenways in my district in Eastern Queens. And so definitely much needed outdoor space, alternative transportations, as well as, a way for people to be out and about, especially, as we recover from the pandemic. So look forward to hearing about the investments and developments in that area on the greenways. And I just wanted to ask a question that I'm sure a lot of folks on this, a lot of other colleagues of mine are sort of struggling with, which is around the commercial truck parking, which is very prevalent in Queens and I know the Bronx as well. And I know that the Majority Whip, as well as Councilmember Williams and a lot of other folks have been working on this issue in Queens. And it's been something the state as well as the city has been trying to address. They've been trying to legislate higher fines for some of the commercial truck drivers, but also, there's no places for them to park, whether it's on the towing side or whether it's just finding a place for commercial vehicles to park. And it is causing a lot of issues. I know a lot of us are hearing from our constituents on this because it's also causing a lot of litter and other issues around the commercial truck parking. And so I was just wondering if there were any plans that the DOE was considering in terms of using, whether it's IIJA funds or other funds, to incentivize creation of off-street parking for larger trucks alongside the major trucking routes. And I know that in New York City, especially even in the outer boroughs, space is an issue, but if you could speak to a little bit of that, or if there's any other ideas that you may have around this issue.
Thank you for the question, Council Member. Yes, we agree that this is a significant curb management concern, and it's happening in your district. It's happening in Staten Island. We've heard from a number of folks. We've reached out to our partners at NYPD and Department of Finance. Again, looking at, can we use stepped up enforcement? Can that be an effective tool? As you point out, one of the challenges here is that there are federal regulations that say truck drivers can only drive a certain number of hours. And when they reach the end of that, they got to stop and sleep. And we want them to do that. We don't want them driving tired. So is there a solution where sites can be found for truckers to park overnight so they can sleep? I believe that's something we're discussing with our partners at EDC. I do believe there is one facility in the city at JFK Airport. Could there be more? I think that's something we're exploring. Rebecca, I don't know if you have further things you want to add.
I was exactly going to say we're working with EDC, and understood. We hear it from all corners of the city, but you've nailed it. I don't have more.
Yeah, and it's like this balance, and I know that Councilmember Williams and I've talked about this a bunch, where it's like, we want to be understanding, obviously, of, like you said, the regulations where the truck drivers need a place to stop, but also at the same time, it's happening in a lot of these residential areas, and so it's, even if you boot the trucks, a lot of the boots, like sometimes they'll just drive it and then just bust the boot open. So it's like, I think it's just trying to find an alternative and a solution. And I don't know. Yeah, if that's something that we can continue the conversation on, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. Next, we will hear from Councilmember Carr, who will be followed by Councilmember Narcisse. Councilmember Carr.
Starting time.
Thank you so much to our chairs, Majority Whip Brooks Powers and Councilmember Kagan, for convening this really important hearing. Good afternoon. I share my colleague Councilmember Lee's concerns about the truck parking situation. You noted it in your comments, so I'll move on to my next topic, which is one of the most important infrastructure projects on Staten Island that I think really plays into the whole regional transportation network is the extension of the HOV lane on the Staten Island Expressway. It's something all my colleagues on Staten Island in both parties support. It's something that we're kind of eagerly awaiting, and I'm just wondering, what are the status of conversations with state DOT about this particular project?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. We too are supportive of HOV and bus lanes on the SIE leading to the Gowanus BQE combination. It's a more efficient way to use our highways. I do not have the latest on this project, and we'll be happy to circle back with our partners at the MTA as well as NISDOT, which manages the road, to get you some more information.
Sure. I think that this is one of those projects that really easily fits into the different federal funding buckets. So I think this really needs to be a priority as we contemplate, what we're going to pursue as part of a regional strategy that also has the benefit for local commuters and users. Moving on, in terms of, we talked a lot about drainage at our hearing a week ago, Chief Sapienza, so I just wanted to touch base. Do you think that there are federal funding buckets available for some of the things we discussed, whether it's new sewer projects or, dredging existing sort of freshwater ponds and whatnot? Where do you see DEP strategy in terms of trying to get the most out of the federal stimulus?
Yeah, Councilmember Carr, there definitely is in the BIL, there's about $50 billion for both drinking water infrastructure, but also on the wastewater side. And we could potentially tap some of those dollars for funding drainage in Staten Island. Right now we're waiting on the federal government and the state to determine what New York City's share may be, whether through grants or through direct reimbursement. But we have a list of projects, including those on Staten Island, that are teed up that can use this funding.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. And Executive Director, in your testimony, you talked a little bit about using more porous or permeable asphalt in city projects. And I've always been interested in the notion of it, but I've heard mixed things about whether or not it could be used here in the Northeast, where our winters are colder, as opposed to some other jurisdictions where it gets better use. And I know we can't use it for our roads because of the concrete subbases that all of them have. So I'm just wondering, what are you thinking of in terms of use of permeable asphalt? Are we talking about, in blue belts and parks? Are we thinking schools where maybe there's some play areas that could be made out of it in terms of keeping drainage on site with some of our new city constructions? I'd love to hear more about that from your perspective.
Absolutely. So let me start here, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues at DOT and DEP to speak a bit about the pilot projects that we've had, that we have implemented over the last few years, which have given us a lot of information about the feasibility of this kind of technology in New York City roads. Permeable pavements, they have a variety of uses and benefits depending on where you put them, right? So they are not just there to help us with stormwater drainage and management, but also they help us with cooling, right? So they help with evapotranspiration, and they help by displacing other sources, of heat that trap heat in the neighborhoods. So it's always been, as part of the city's heat adaptation strategy, one of the tools in the toolbox, right? I love it. We want to see it implemented to the degree that is feasible in as many kinds of roads as we possibly can. That said, our colleagues at the Department of Environmental Protection and at DOT have started to do some demonstration projects across the city in order to understand some of the concerns that you have raised, right? So maintenance and sweeping and just the overall performance. So maybe I can just stop here and see if you guys want to jump in and speak more directly about your pilot projects.
Thank you, Executive Director Guzman. I'll just say that just picking up on where you left off, pursuant to Local Law 80, DOT and DEP are required to conduct a study on possible use of permeable materials in roadways and sidewalks under DOT jurisdiction.
Time expired.
A pilot program needs to be a part of the study. And what we have done right now, we're in a pilot period right now in which we have 3 locations that we are in the stage of installation and or evaluating different permeable materials. Those locations are 3 locations in Brooklyn. And so as we install these materials and then we begin like I said, an assessment, a monitoring program, and we can kind of evaluate the performance and then start making decisions about what materials make sense, what sorts of applications they could be used for, and so forth. So that is one thing that DOT is involved in directly right now.
And from DEP's perspective, it's the maintenance that we've been particularly looking at. Porous surfaces, they have pores in them, and they can accumulate street grit that periodically needs to be cleaned through vacuuming primarily. So that's what we've been looking at to see, what the frequency of that may need to be.
All right, I thank you for your answers, and thank you for the time, chairs.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Narcisse, who will be followed by Councilmember Williams. Councilmember Narcisse.
Starting time.
Time yet. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Chair Majority Whip Brooks Power, and Ari Kagan. Thank you, and all my colleagues and all the team that's here to answer some of our questions. While EDC directly operates the New York City ferry system, has DOT explored whether expanding access to the ferry system would provide for more meaningful transportation options for transit desert like my area? In the view of DOT, could this be a use for IIJA funding? Has DOT had conversation with EDC regarding expanding ferry stops?
Thank you, Council Member, for the question. The answer is we do believe ferries. Obviously we operate the Staten Island Ferry, as you mentioned, and EDC operates the NYC Ferry. Can be a tool to expand transit options to underserved communities. There were a number of expansions to the citywide ferry service under the previous administration. As for additional plans, I don't have information on that. Would be happy to come back with you and connect you with our colleagues in EDC to talk about those issues. In terms of federal funding, I'm going to turn to my colleague Yogesh Sanghvi, who can talk a little bit about some additional monies that we have gotten from the federal government to support our ferry operations.
Oh, hi, yeah. So, Council Member, since we run the Staten Island Ferry, I would know this aspect of it more than the New York City Ferry. But clearly, the federal funding that is expected to come from the Federal Transit Administration, I think earlier almost everything we talked about related to Federal Highway Administration, but the Federal Transit Administration funding that comes to us can also be used for this New York City Ferry program, with some changes to the contracting and associated things. So yeah, we do expect additional transit funding to also come to New York City.
And I'm hoping to get one in Canarsie Pier, because we live in a transportation desert, as the CM Brooks mentioned earlier. I don't know if anyone have problem with the signage that's on the street signs of New York City. Some of them, we can hardly read them, and there's no lighting. I think it's time, if we can use any federal funding to address those, that would be lovely, because you can hardly read the sign at nighttime. That's one. How will DOT will implement the funding, that the federal funding to resurfacing, leveling roads, and implementing proper drainage, that which is DEP? What is the current goal for resurfacing? How many lane miles were surfaced in 2020 and 2021? And what is projected for this year? What is the current timeline for roads resurfacing? For instance, how many years are roads estimated to last before resurfacing?
I'm going to turn to my colleagues here. Thank you for the question, council member. We endeavor to maintain all of our roads throughout the 5 boroughs in a state of good repair because it's good for safety, it's good for accessibility. In fiscal year 23, DOT will receive over $260 million to resurface 1,100 lane miles and up to 50 linear miles of bike lanes, I believe. The baseline funding for 1,150 lane miles was provided to DOT last in the April plan and ensures stability for this important program for the years to come. So 1150 is an increase from fiscal year 21. We were impacted by the pandemic, both in terms of labor availability and funding, and we're able to resurface 918 lane miles. So it's an increase, and it's also a baseline, which again helps us with planning to keep those assets in a state of good repair. How often do we resurface? Really depends on the condition of the street. We do regular assessments of all the streets across the 5 boroughs, and those assessments, play a role in determining
Time expired.
Determining which streets are resurfaced. As you can imagine, roadways that carry a lot of buses and trucks, a lot of traffic, tend to get resurfaced on a more frequent schedule, while quiet residential streets may not get resurfaced for longer intervals. If there are specific locations in your district that you're concerned about, we'd be more than happy to discuss those with you and your staff.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question, because the streets are always buckling right after they've even resurfacing. So I find it odd. So we have to do streets that often. And then in some areas, like in my district, I understand we build on water, but some of the streets are horrible. And you can be done in 1 year or 2 years, they already do for repair. And thank you for the Greenway and all the questions that my colleagues that I had too. So I'm glad that they had asked them before me. So thank you for your support, DOT. You've been great.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank
you, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Williams, who will be followed by Councilmember Ariola. Councilmember Williams.
Starting time.
Thank you, chairs, and to the administration for testifying. I also had a whole bunch of questions, but I will reframe them and follow up on some questions from my colleagues. So following up on the question from Councilmember Lee, outside of what she outlined, outside of what we know the issues are, can you tell me like what the challenges are in terms of getting to the solution? Because it's clear to me that every single person knows what the issue is and we have an idea of like what the solution is, but what is the challenge from getting to identification of the issue and actually tangibly solving the problem?
Do you mean in terms of finding truck parking?
In terms of finding truck parking, in terms of building capacity for enforcement. It's a very broad, comprehensive issue. And so just wanted to understand like from your perspective, because there was a lot of like, yeah, we know about it, we're looking into it. And like, I feel like as council members, we're kind of saying the same thing, like, we know about it, we're looking into it, we're doing these short-term things, but what exactly is the challenge from issue to solution? Like, is it money? Is it, is it lack of space? Like, what is it like? I don't know, politics, like what is the issue? Why can't we know what the issue is, we know what the solution is, why can't we get to the solution? Just wondering if there's anything else you want to add there.
Well, I mean, I think one thing and I don't know if anyone else want to jump in on this, and I can't say I have all that information at my fingertips, so apologies for that. I think one of the issues is finding space for all of these trucks. And I think the other thing is that the amount of trucks coming in the city has risen so much in the past couple of years, especially since the pandemic, since, most people are having a lot of things delivered directly to their homes. So you have an increase in truck traffic, and then you have an increase of them needing space on our street. And as Will Carey was saying earlier, that they can only drive so many hours a day. So then they have to find a place to, so I don't know all the issues are for that, for truck parking, but I would say that finding space for them is probably number one.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I believe, council member, we're having conversations with our partner agencies about whether there are sites, maybe sites that are used as parking during the day that could be used overnight, and happy to report back on what we're able to identify. Are we able to identify
Yes.
some candidates?
Yes, I would love that. I actually had an impromptu call this morning with the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. He's one of my constituents, and this issue is something that is important to him. And one of the things I suggested to him that I'll suggest here is that a cross-agency task force be committed to this, because even from my short 3 months, I've had to work with Department of Sanitation. There's issues that have come up from Consumer Affairs around the specific trucking list that police departments can only use. We have to, of course, work with the police department, and of course, we have to work with DOT. And so, like, this is an issue that is cutting across our city, cutting across our agencies. And I have not seen like focused attention on how do we get to all of the issues that we know exist, to finding a tangible solution and like working to execute and implement the solution, because we also know the solution. I just don't think we've worked tangibly to execute the solution.
Yes, we are engaging with our partners at NYPD. We've engaged with our partners at Department of Finance, and we're talking to EDC to see what we can do in the short term around both enforcement and finding alternate sites. I'd also say that we have the agency has a longer term vision in partnership with EDC to try to get more freight off of trucks and to get them onto rail and water, and that is part of take more years to bear fruit, but part of an effort to, if we can shift more onto those types of modes, we can get more of these trucks off of our streets in the first place.
Yeah, I would love, as I'm sure many people on this call would love to work with you and have a commitment from the administration to really have a focused approach to this, because I think it requires focused attention, and it just doesn't seem like that has taken place. The other questions that I have is around prioritization. There's a lot of acronym utilization. Like, what is a PIA?
A PIA is a priority investment area. It is an approach that we developed as part of our streets plan, the plan that we were required by the council to produce, to look at safety, transit connectivity,
Time expired.
Bike network connectivity for the entire city. And what we did is we kind of took a step back and we said, where are the areas that we really need to be focusing our efforts over the next couple of years? And so we looked at things like historic levels of investment. We looked at income. We looked at safety data, and then developed these specific areas that will, it doesn't mean that all of our projects going forward will be in these areas, but they will be a special point of emphasis as we develop both our in-house projects and our long-term capital plan.
And Councilwoman, I wanted to say that I could send your office our equity hearing testimony, which has a lot of this information in it too. If you wanted to dig into it a little bit further, that's one thing I could follow up with, it talks about priority investment areas as well.
Yes, I would love to get that.
Sure.
And is there a report on the PIAs that is accessible?
Yes, there certainly is. There's the streets plan itself, and we will get that to your staff.
I'll send both.
Okay, because yes, I would love to see that before I guess make any more comments, but I think there seems to be an opaque process, and it's been mentioned a few times, whether it's a stop sign or catch basins being cleaned, in terms of which communities are prioritized over other communities. And I'm just interested in the data that you all use to even produce the report, and just clearly seeing like where the lack of investment has occurred within our city. Just two quick things, and you don't have to answer, it can be follow-up, is just how are greenways determined? because I have some thoughts on potential greenways and wondering like how that gets determined and what is the process. And then the other question is also wanting to look at some alternative options for ATVs. I know there's been a lot of conversations. I definitely don't want to see a bulldozer going over hundreds of ATVs. I don't really think that's useful because just the other day when it was hot, there was like 50 of them running down Linden Boulevard. So we know that's not really addressing the problem, but we'd love to kind of work with the administration to find some more compassionate solutions to ATV use.
Thank you, Council Member, for the question. As I mentioned with Council Member Rivera, we're very bullish on greenways. We think they offer a tremendous benefit to communities in terms of open space, in terms of bike and pedestrian access, in terms of livability, and that's really our big focus with this federal grant. Where we're going for planning money to look at where are there gaps in the current greenway network, and we wholeheartedly welcome suggestions from you and other members of the council about where you think that there are gaps in your districts or opportunities in your districts that you think we should be looking at. Community engagement will be a tremendous focus of this study, and we'll be seeking broad stakeholder input. On the question of ATVs, this is they are our streets, but it's NYPD who enforces those rules, and we'd be happy to follow up with them to see what their sort of current approach is to those illegal vehicles.
But I also think the administration, I was going to say, I'm assuming the administration is on and hearing that concern of yours as well.
Yeah, because in other states, they provide space similar to the trucks, right? We have an issue because we have a space issue. And I'm not saying that would deter, but at least there's like an alternative where people can go and ride their bikes. There's an alternative where people can park. And so I just always love to have the conversation of enforcement and also like, how do we build the capacity for alternative options? So really trying to look at a carrot and stick model instead of just a stick model. So thank you so much. And I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Councilmember,
for allowing me the time.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Ariola, who will be followed by Councilmember Brewer. Councilmember Ariola.
Starting time.
Thank you, chairs. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the administration for testifying. I'd like to get back to the title of environmental injustice and climate injustice. There is a community that both Councilmember Barron and I represent. It is 30 feet below their neighboring communities. It is referred to as the Hole. I've lived in the community for the majority of my life. I know not in the Hole, but in the surrounding community. There was a time that there were no homes. Now there are residences there. There is a community group there called Justice for the Hole. There are small business owners there. I know that the DEP is aware of it. There has been a sewer project on the books for many years that can never be realized unless this community is brought up to grade. I'm listening to a lot of different projects that are happening throughout the city, and I support each and every one of them, but we need to put this area where people who cannot get out of their homes, not just when there's a catastrophic climate event, but when there is a small rainfall, that people won't go to work, kids don't go to school, they cannot get out of their homes. And they're asking for justice for their area, and I'm fighting for them. So if there are federal dollars, I'd like to see those federal dollars earmarked or even considered for this portion of the district. These are homeowners, these are taxpayers, these are small business owners, and they deserve a look-see, and they're never on anyone's radar. We need to bring this community up to grade so that long-standing DEP sewer project can go through. And we recently gave an interview in a newspaper, Councilmember Barron and myself, and committed to working together to make sure that this area gets the attention that it needs. So are you aware of it, MOXJ? Are you aware of it, DOT? I know that DEP is aware of it. How can we look at this project? And if we still have studies and areas to look at, how can we get this particular area to be part of that study and perhaps get a portion of those federal dollars?
Absolutely, Councilmember, and thank you so much for that question. We share your concern and absolutely think that, improving the resiliency of all neighborhoods, and especially those that are most vulnerable to climate impacts, and that also includes flood and heat, right? Like it's a top priority for the administration and certainly for our office. We are aware of the situation in the whole. And this is absolutely, something that we continue to discuss with our partners, DOT and DEP, right? Building resilient streets and improving drainage in the city's most low-lying areas, including those that are most affected by hurricanes and extreme weather events, extreme rain events. So it's definitely on our radar. I wonder if maybe DEP and DOT want to add a little bit more of specificity when it comes to the street racings.
Sure, and I could start about the drainage, and Councilmember Ariola, thank you for that question. And as you said, these the folks who have been living there have been suffering for decades. The challenge is that to get sewage to flow uphill is impossible. So some of those streets without being elevated present a very major challenge for us. I know that we have been working with our partners at city agencies and DOT and DDC to look for solutions. We think we have some thoughts about how to maybe resolve some of it, and certainly happy to come out and talk to you and explain to you and Councilmember Barron some of those potential workarounds.
I appreciate that. And the fact that there are federal dollars now, because it's always been a matter of, not enough money to raise the neighborhood 2 grade. It will be a tremendous amount of money. We know that. But if there are federal dollars currently available, I think this is an area, as the commissioner, as the chief operating officer so eloquently said, has suffered for decades. And, it's time that we do really take a hard look at this area. So thank you for your time. And just quickly, I think I have a little time left, DOT, Assistant Commissioner Zach, I would love to have a conversation offline with you.
Love to.
Thank you.
Just to jump in, I do want to echo Chief Sapienza's comments. Just to let you know, the DOT is working very closely with our partners at DEP at the drainage, at the street raisings that have been contemplated in this area, some of the challenges with perhaps putting in ways to mitigate the problem, and then balancing them with land acquisition type issues. Obviously, we don't want to disrupt certain properties in that kind of way, and we're looking at all different options to try to mitigate without having impact to property owners in that sense. So we are working currently and talking to our partners at DEP, and we're very aware of the problem.
Okay, maybe we can all go down there together, maybe do a multi-agency task force down there. MOXJ, DOT, DEP, and all the agencies that are necessary to make sure that we can address the issues that they are suffering from. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Brewer, who will be followed by Councilmember Stevens. Councilmember Brewer.
Starting time.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to the chairs and very well prepared agencies. Having heard agencies for the last 40 years, I think you're doing very well. Number one is the delivery bikes. There is a proposal from the folks who are supporting them, the deliveristas, to have a charging station, perhaps in a street zone somewhere. I would love to do it on the Upper West Side because there are so many deliveries and they do need to get charged. So that's something that I would love to hear more about. Number two, when we fought Walmart many years ago, we learned that the big trucks, it's not just the trucks, it's those 18-wheelers killing our streets, etc. There was some proposal, very controversial, from the stores to have smaller trucks changed in New Jersey. And then you bring the smaller trucks in and not the 18-wheelers. So I didn't know if that's something that you're considering or where that proposal is at. We fought Walmart and won. We don't want Walmart in our city, at least I don't. But we do know that perhaps smaller trucks, more expensive to the stores and to Amazon, et cetera, but maybe better for our streets and our city. Number 3, APS signals, something that I've been working on over the years. I just want to get an update on where we are on that issue. Number 4, the CSOs. I know this is an ongoing issue. DEP knows it well, but I just didn't know, is there any movement on trying to have even more or even less CSOs? Very expensive. And one way to maybe do that, something that I want, is all the school playgrounds to be open to the public. And when Trust for the Public Land does their conversions, they put in massive, fabulous opportunities to have basically catch the rainwater. So is there some way, sometimes you can get innovative funding to do something innovative, and maybe using federal money to convert the playgrounds under a DEP auspices, something to think about. And then also, there is, I think, I just want to know, where do I look? Because years ago I passed a bill, it got merged, that we would know how many vehicles are coming into the city every day and what kind. I just want to be sure that data is still available. And then finally, just an update on the 79th Street Rotunda. I know that you got funding to convert that to something that we can actually use, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member, for your questions. I'll start with some of the items and then defer others to some of my colleagues. You asked about how are we working with the deliveristas. We've met with the Deliverista advocacy group, and we understand that they're developing a center in Williamsburg, sort of a delivery worker center, and have had very preliminary discussions with them about, I know they're planning to put charging inside the center, but they've also brought some other proposals to us, and we're reviewing them. I think broadly speaking, we are aligned with supporting delivery workers, working with our partners at the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection to make sure that these workers are treated with dignity and that they have safe working conditions. So that is something we've had preliminary discussions on and are going to be engaging with them more.
Okay, I also want one on the Upper West Side, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. In terms of freight movement, you talked about the challenges of having large semi trucks or even large box trucks come in. And last year we released 2 plans. We released our Smart Truck Management Plan and Delivering Green, which were both focused on ways to mitigate the environmental impacts of trucking and freight delivery in New York City, and to promote more sustainable means of moving that freight in and out. I think there's several avenues that we're pursuing. I had mentioned earlier looking at water and rail as an alternative to having those big trucks come in, and then once water and rail, you can either transfer to smaller trucks. We're starting to see the option for electric trucks, as well as we have a cargo bike program where we're looking to distribute freight that way. We also, I believe, and I can get you the details, have a micro distribution center pilot, this is sort of a similar idea of bringing goods to one central location and then breaking them down and distributing them with electric vehicles or electric cargo bikes.
Is that last one happening, or is it just, you can't really buy
Time expired.
We will get you further information on those pilots. On APS, Rebecca, do you have the latest?
I don't. I'm gonna, Councilwoman, I'm gonna have to follow. I don't have that at my fingertips. Can I follow up with you?
Yes. Yep.
And on the rotunda too.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I believe we're gonna, I'll pass it over to Chief Sapienza for the, was it combined sewer overflow question?
CSO.
Yeah, Councilmember Brewer, no, thank you for that. And just quickly, in addition to the federal infrastructure money directly for water projects, we also want to leverage some of the DOT project funding for improving permeability of their work as well. Porous pavement we talked about, and other green infrastructure. So that'll reduce the amount of the load into the sewer system that causes CSOs.
Okay, so but when we can't really fix the problem, but we can mitigate it. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay, how about something innovative in the playgrounds?
I can add to that, and then maybe punt it over to DEP. I just wanted to say that we also love the School Yards to Playgrounds program. As you know, it's been around since our very early iteration of Plan YC, right? The first city sustainability plan, and we have done a lot of installations over the course of the city. Of course, they help us with health benefits and cognitive development benefits for children, but also the very tangible environmental benefits, right? Like permeable surfaces and stormwater capture and runoff reductions. They have a ton of community value benefits. So anyways, we love them. So, we do have a plan as part of the new normal, funded commitment to do 20 additional playgrounds over the next 4 years. I think it's 47 million or so dedicated to the initiative. We can absolutely follow up with your office to provide more information and do a follow-up if you would like.
Okay, I appreciate. I mean, I think I want them all open. With all due respect, I know when it started, Dinkins, Richard Murphy, I got that whole thing. But the issue is, I think we could open them all and find some innovative money, even beyond the 20. Because 20 is good, but it's not very many.
It's not very many.
More. Okay, you got Trust for Public Land is open, Joint Parks, DOE is open, and everybody else is closed.
Yep.
I have an APS answer, Councilwoman.
Great, I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay, so at the end of January, we've installed APS at 977 intersections citywide. We are planning to install APS at 400 locations this calendar year alone, almost double our high watermark of the last 2 years when we averaged just over 200 intersections per year. Now, next year we plan to increase to 500 and continue ramping up until we are eventually installing more than 1,000 intersections per year, with a target of having 10,000 intersections equipped with APS by the end of 2031.
Great. Okay. All right, and the last thing that I'm sorry is the issue of, maybe I should know this, the data of vehicles coming in each day. Is that something that you collect? I know the DOT does. Is it on the open data portal? And I should know that. I think you do collect it. What comes in every day?
So
but where is it on the open data portal?
I don't believe we collect data every day, council member. I believe that we, working with our partners at the MTA and the Port Authority, do an annual count that is coordinated through NIMTIC, that is called Hubbound, and that provides a very sort of rich data set, not only on vehicles, but number of transit riders, number of trains, number of buses, all that are coming into Manhattan south of 60th Street on a typical day in October.
All right, thank you. I'll follow up on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Councilmember Stevens was next in line, but lost her connection briefly, so we will go to her next. Councilmember Stevens will be followed by Councilmember Nurse. Councilmember Stevens.
Starting time.
I thank you, chairs, for holding this very important committee hearing. And I've been in and out all day because there's been 2 hearings going on. So forgive me if these questions have already been asked and answered. But I just wanted to know what is being done to prioritize transit deserts to develop new transportation options. I know we talked about ferries, but are there any other transportation options that we're thinking about, like possibly electric shuttles and things like that throughout the city? Because one, I am championing, and I would love to see us having a ferry option in the West Bronx, and think that it should be there. But I also think that we should be looking at other transit options, like I said, like possibly electric shuttles and interborough electric shuttles that I think could be helpful.
Thank you, Council Member, for the question. New York City DOT, the administration, and Commissioner Rodriguez are all committed to expanding transportation options for New Yorkers who live in underserved neighborhoods, particularly New Yorkers who live in neighborhoods without easy access to the subway. As you mentioned, ferries is one tool. The others that we are really focused on right now are the bus system. We've worked closely with the MTA on their redesign of the bus system in the Bronx, and are looking to make targeted investments on the street network to help support the MTA's redesign of service so that buses are more reliable and don't get stuck
So I have a
in
question
traffic.
because even with the redesign, I've been giving pushback, especially even in the Bronx, because a part of that, the redesign has been to remove bus stops. So that means that there's longer walking distances between stops. So that's why I'm thinking like electric shuttles or something that could be helpful, because when we're removing those, we're not thinking about the seniors and the disabled that now have to walk longer distances to help speed up services. And then in addition, I've also been requesting for additional buses to be added, because to just say that we're going to have less stops and that's going to speed up the time also is kind of counterproductive. So can you talk a little bit about what that really looks like?
In terms of, what we're focused on are things like bus lanes and bus stop amenities and other things to move the buses more quickly. We're certainly aware of the trade-off that comes between with slightly fewer stops with the 3 block distance rather than the 2 block distance. There's benefit to the bus having a faster route, but that does mean that some folks do have to walk slightly longer. And I think that trade-off is one where the MTA has decided that there's more benefit to the riding public by switching to that
But that
stop
doesn't
spacing.
benefit the folks who actually have to deal with it. And that's been my pushback, because I think that it's kind of, I think it's a little disrespectful when we say things like the trade-off, when we have seniors who then have to walk, or people who have disabilities, and especially people with disabilities who already have struggles on public transportation in the train station because we don't have accessibility. So the trade-off to me doesn't seem like it's actually benefiting the masses, but continue, because I have major issues with that.
I mean, I guess I'm Councilwoman, can you tell me about any recent conversations that you've had with the MTA and what any of their feedback has been on the bus stop removals and
exactly what we're saying. The assistant commissioner around, we had to look at it, we had to weigh the benefits, and a lot of times people just want a bus stop in front of their building.
Yeah.
But when you live in a transit desert and you already are living distances from the train station, and now you have to walk a distance for the bus. And then if you have a disability or you're a senior, you're already struggling on the trains when you get there, because a lot of these places are two-fare zones. It's, to me, what considerations are being really taken. And to say it's outweighing it because it speeds up the bus, that to me is just, are we really looking at the alternatives and looking to help and serve everyone? And those are vulnerable, and those are vulnerable populations.
Understood. And I'm also curious if they've had any feedback on your suggestion of electric shuttles.
No, I haven't got any feedback on that, but that's just something to think about when we're thinking about some of these shorter in between things that could actually kind of help with that. And it would also alleviate some of the bus issues that we're having, because sometimes they're not as reliable. So,
and I know that part of the conversation when they're doing bus redesign is talking about more frequent service. And if your constituents, just asking, if your constituents had a bus stop removed, but and part of the commitment would be, but the bus stop service would increase by X amount, you'd see X amount of more buses in an hour. How do you think how do you think that would be received in your district?
So my question to them was, even with saying that removing the stops increased the time, there was no talks about increasing the amount of buses. Because the issue is, if you have 5 buses, whether you remove a stop isn't going to increase the time. But no one is talking about that. It's just saying that we're going to increase the time because we're doing this. And so, example, in my district, I have the 13 bus, which is pretty much non-existent. But when it does come, it's only 3 or 4 buses on that bus line. So even with removing the stops, you're increasing the time, but it's not increasing the frequency because it's only 3 buses that's going in a loop. So it's things like that that's not being discussed or being uplifted. And so that's why I think it's important that when we're talking about frequency of times, what does that really look like and how's that really impacting the community? And I just had another question even before, because even talking about like Access-a-Ride, what are we doing to really think about helping that infrastructure? Because I've gotten a lot of calls around how Access-a-Ride is not reliable, and they're having so many issues. Are we talking about how we're helping and supporting that infrastructure as well when we're thinking about federal money?
So Access-a-Ride is operated by our partners at the MTA, and we have worked with them over the years on different options. This includes working with them to enable accessoride members to access the to use taxis and for-hire vehicles. It's been a little while since I've been immersed in that issue. Be happy to go back to our contacts and get you some more information on the status of those efforts.
And also, we can just additionally say that you've raised all these issues with us too, and to amplify your messaging.
No, thank you. Those are really important. I think that is sometimes when we're talking about frequency and these things that we miss some of the little nuances. So thank you. And definitely, I think bringing up the issue around accessoride is going to be even more important as well, because those are very vulnerable populations and they're struggling, especially coming out of the pandemic. And I just got off a call with some advocates a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling me about all the things that they're going through with this. And even my mom, who uses accessoride, has been having major issues. So this is something that's very important and near and dear to my heart. And I think it definitely needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Nurse, who will be followed by Councilmember Palladino. Councilmember Nurse.
Starting time.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, chairs, and thanks for everyone for being here. I just have two questions today. One is kind of selfishly specific to my neighborhood, and then the other one is to the broader resiliency issues. But the first one is around the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer HATS, that the feasibility study. It's my understanding that they've restarted the study, the New York and New Jersey Harbor Tributaries Focus Area Feasibility Studies, that they've restarted at, and they anticipate selecting a plan soon and creating a public engagement or public review process. I'm just curious how the mayor's office of climate and environmental justice is planning to prioritize the public engagement and to ensure that local community priorities and decision-making are included or centered in the plan that is selected.
Great, thank you for that question, Councilmember Nurse. And I would like to ask my colleagues to also jump in on here to provide more detail, but just that your overall is, I want to clarify one thing. When the tentatively selected plan is released this summer, that kicks off a public engagement process that is absolutely the Army Corps of Engineers engagement process. Okay, so we will absolutely need, to amplify those efforts to ensure that communities know that this is taking place, but also hopefully work with you guys to ensure that you are aware of the options, that you have an opportunity to comment and work with us on concerns, and also that you're able to bring your constituents into the process. Again, it's not a process that will be city-led. It will be a process that is Army Corps-led. It's their thing. All of that public comment is going to go into consideration by the Army Corps, and eventually the development of further studies and design that will complete when their study is released in 2024. But just wanted to just issue that call to you guys. Like, we are eagerly awaiting on the options part of the plan. We know that every option will not be perfect or exactly conducive to environmental justice in the city or to the protection of our neighborhoods in the ways that we want to. We absolutely will welcome your input and your participation in that engagement to ensure that we communicate that back to the Army Corps. Carrie, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add. You're our day-to-day brave soldier with the Army Corps.
No problem. Yeah, I just would want to reiterate everything you just said, Kizzy. Again, this is the Corps' process. They will put out this tentatively selected plan and what they call a draft report, which will include a very, very high-level environmental review. All of the work that they're putting out is based on sort of their own internal analysis, right? And so the public comment period is really meant for constituents, communities, stakeholders to say, you also need to consider X, Y, and Z, or you have overlooked this component. So it's critical that we work together to get the word out, both about what is in the tentatively selected plan and the opportunity to comment. So we would absolutely love to partner with your offices and everyone's office really on making sure people, one, know about this, and then you have the opportunity to really provide comment and provide that local perspective. So yeah, there's more to come. And you know, the other sort of critical component I would say was, you know, if you yourself want to, you know, ask the Corps for a briefing, we found that is also something that they will respond to.
Okay, great. And my last question is about the new Interborough Express. And I'm asking one because there's supposed to be a stop through my district. So kind of excited about it. I guess love to hear from you all if you consider this part of a greater resiliency to our public transportation system. And then also what federal funding going to be considered to support this or move it along? I'm sorry, I don't really know all the funding streams and whether most of it's coming out of the state or federal. I'm still catching up to this project, quite frankly, but just curious of how you see this fitting into overall resiliency, and you know, what are the opportunities that you see for the federal funding to move that faster, particularly for the outer borough area?
The MTA, thank
I'm
you.
expired.
Councilwoman, it's nice to see you again. I know the MTA is in the very early stages of the Interborough, and I don't know if you've seen the kind of the materials that they put out when they announced it. If not, I can send that to you. I'm not sure about what they're going to be seeking in terms of funding, but I can reach out to their InterGov and ask them to directly follow up with you if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great.
No problem.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Councilmember Palladino, who will be followed by Councilmember Lewis. Councilmember Palladino.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wow. What a meeting. Holy smokes. There's an awful lot to digest here with an awful lot of money. And my question is going to be statement is going to be somewhat simplistic, so I won't hold anybody up. We're doing this a really long time. So you guys, you got to be pulling your hair out. I have to go back to what Linda Lee said, Councilmember Lee. I live in my district is 19. Going to keep it real simple. And I border with the Whitestone Bridge and the Throgs Neck Bridge, and this is about trucks. And though we all would like to see electric trucks and all this other stuff that's going to happen in the future, relatively now, if we speak about what's happening now, is we have a real issue here with these gigantic tractor trailers. And look, this country has run on trucks forever. So let's address the present. And the present is this, the idling overnight. Most of them come from out of state. Just for the record, my husband drives a 52-foot tractor trailer truck. So they do need to stop and they do need to rest overnight. And if it's cold, they need to run their trucks to keep the generator going for the heat, and vice versa. If it's hot, they need it to go for the air conditioning. Mm-hmm. However, my sympathy is extremely extended to my neighbors who live along the the Cross Island and the Whitestone Expressway, where the trucks actually stop by tens and tens and tens right down to Linden Place. And the question was, where can we put them? Because they're listening to them idle overnight. It's not fair. The cops come to give tickets to somebody from Montana or Wisconsin is unrealistic. They're just not going to pay it. I'm just wondering if DOT could just enforce a no standing sign or anything like that. I speak to my police constantly. It's in the 109th precinct. They've exhausted everything they could possibly do. I've lived here all my life. Here's the thing. I do have suggestions where we could put these trucks overnight. We have the Home Depot, which is located in College Point, tremendous parking lot, empty overnight because it's not the 24-hour Home Depot. We've got shopping centers on 20th Avenue, only a stone's throw from the Whitestone Bridge. Again, empty at night, so where some of these trucks could park. We have the New York Times building, which is virtually empty. And there's a tremendous parking lot there. I'm asking for your consideration going forward, if we could somehow work together so I could get these people who are absolutely suffering with the noise and the pollution in their bedroom windows If we could just do something to help these folks out. I have one man in particular, no joke. His name is Tony, and he lives on the side right there. I get a video every day. And not to mention the garbage that they leave when they take off. So this poor soul is suffering terribly. We've been talking for 3 years, and now I am the city councilwoman, and I would love to give these people some sort of response, since I do know of areas that are empty, 12, 13 hours at a time, starting at around 8 p.m., going overnight to 6 or 7 a.m. So if we could do something for this neighborhood, I sure would appreciate it.
Thank you for all of that. And I'm sorry that your constituent Tony has such a
It's not just Tony, it's everyone.
no.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Understood. But, I've heard the Home Depot idea before, and I'm going to share these with our partners at EDC, and that idea of like huge, parking lots that aren't being used overnight.
Huge.
Yeah, no, they're huge. So I tend to think that sounds like a great idea too. I agree. Yeah. So let us share that with our EDC colleagues. I'm guessing they've heard this before, and maybe that's part of the equation when they're using to figure this out, or at least come up with a solution. So yeah, I'm happy to share that. And nice to meet you too.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to meet you as well. We also have the New York Times parking lot. We have what I named 3 of the 20th Avenue. That's with Target, and there's a group of little stores, huge, tremendous box stores. BJ's is there. That lot is empty also. These are not 24-hour a day.
I'm expired.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. This has been helpful. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. At least I did right by Tony. I could tell you.
He's famous.
Thank you.
Tony is famous.
Oh, you know Tony?
Oh no, I'm just saying we're talking about him at this hearing, so now we all know who Tony is.
It wouldn't surprise me in the least.
I love it.
Okay, take care. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Lewis. Councilmember Lewis.
Starting time.
Thank you so much, Chair Brooks Powers and Chair Kagan, for holding this hearing. I want to thank all of our participants who are here with us today that have testified. I have some quick questions. I think the responses were really great. I got a lot of notes. I wanted to ask, in regards to DOT, the agency submitted a request for federal funding for the renovation and upgrade of the B82 SBS line, which will include rebuilding medians along Kings Highway, which goes many council districts, not just mine, but also in the 46 and some others. I wanted to know what's the status of that application and how much of the project would the federal grant fund if it was approved, and if the federal funding falls through, will the city continue with the B82 SBS project out of its own pocket?
Thank you, Council Member, for the question. We submitted the RAISE grant. We are obviously big fans of this project and the benefits it will bring to the local community, including to your district, both in terms of improving bus service as well as the urban environment, livability, access, all those things. We submitted the application, I believe, last week on April 14th. It is for $17 million. And we are hoping to hear back from USDOT on whether or not we got the award this fall. And Leslie, do you have further details you want to share?
I would just share that we already, just to note that we already do have support from the FTA on this, and we also, from FHWA on this, and we also have some state funding on this project. So I think it's, we put forward this project because we think it checks all the boxes. It's a great candidate, and we are cautiously optimistic that we can get some federal funding on this.
I hope we do. I wanted to ask, will the B82 SBS funding, if granted, cover Kings Highway and renovations in parts of Flatbush Avenue? Because that SBS was implemented like 2018. So I wanted to know if that would cover parts of Flatbush Avenue, but in addition to that, the intersection of Troy Avenue and Kings Highway, which has been very problematic for constituents that live in that area with the redirection of the street. And I wanted to know if DOT would be working on that as well. And also kiosks. So there was a kiosk that was put in front of a constituent's home once the SBS was implemented. And DOT worked with MTA to ask to see if we would be able to remove that. So there's so many different issues with that particular area. So I wanted to ask like what's being done and if some of that funding would cover not only Kings Highway, but Flatbush Avenue and Troy.
So recalling some of the details of the scope of the project, yes, I believe we will be working at Troy and Kings Highway. So good news. As far as kiosk and so forth, I think I'm going to have to circle back and probably.
Leslie, I might be able to take this one.
Oh, okay.
Council member, do you mean the fare machine where you stick your Metro card in and get the receipt? So yes,
Okay.
I mean, obviously we can work with our partners at the MTA if there's an issue with the siting of those. I think longer term, or not actually really that longer term, what we hope to do is work with the MTA to transition entirely to the Omni system, so that there would be tap card or phone readers at every entrance to the bus, so that you wouldn't have to get the piece of paper anymore. That's a priority of ours. We're working with the MTA, and Rebecca, do you have anything further on?
Yeah, I don't, but I think
Okay.
you covered it well in
Okay.
terms of, yep.
I think you covered it well too, Will. I'm really, really appreciative. You do not understand. I put in a bill about kiosks in front of people's homes because they're paying their taxes and there's kiosks
Right.
in their homes. I don't think that's fair, but I think the Omni system is a great alternative. The faster we could get this out of Mr. Boyd's property, the better.
Okay.
I would love to work with you, Leslie, Rebecca, and everyone else to address these issues. But I do thank you for submitting that application and look forward to working with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Councilwoman. Great to
Thank
see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other council members with first round questions, we will turn back to Chair Brooks Powers. Chair Brooks Powers. Oh,
Thank you.
I think-
I see Councilmember Narcisse. Do you have more questions? Hold on.
Yeah. One of the questions before I go, has the city explored innovative solutions to address declining sewage and drainage infrastructure? Because that's been a problem for our city.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Council Member. We've in our 10-year capital plan have significant funding for sewage and drainage infrastructure. After Hurricane Ida, new funding was added, and we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, because this morning about 7 o'clock, I received a video from last night, about two of them actually. One of them sent me detailed videos of all the on Avenue K, which we just did a big project on the creek, but Avenue K by 105, 108. I think we have two flooded home, and one of them is just ridiculously flooded.
Yeah, we had some challenges last night with the tidal inflows, very high tide, and so along the coastline we had a couple of issues. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. Power. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to take a moment and just circle back to both my colleagues, Councilmember Lee and Williams' question around trucking. As they mentioned, it's something that's prevalent in Southeast Queens. I know it's an issue, quite honestly, across the city. I wanted to get a better understanding, one, of the timeline in which we can expect for the agencies to get back to us with some type of framework of a solution or action plan to address it, but also the trucking industry advocates have expressed interest in utilizing the IIJA funds to incentivize the creation of off-street parking. for large trucks alongside major truck routes? Is this something that DOT has considered? And then I know JFK has truck parking, but you wouldn't even know it because in parts of my district, the amount of these 18-wheeler trucks that are parking in residential blocks are just crazy. So is there a way for the city to contract more space with the Port Authority? Because I know the Port Authority has a good amount of space on their, well, on the city property, the city-owned property, but where they're leasing. So I'd like to understand that too.
Thank you for the question, Council Member. We hear loud and clear today that that this is a concern. We're obviously already working on it, and with our partners, the DOF, NYPD, and EDC, and we can circle back with them and see when we can provide further follow-up on the strategy to identify additional off-street parking spaces, either on Port Authority controlled parcels or privately owned parking lots.
So about when could we expect to hear back from the agency? Do you think you need about 60 days to report back to the committee members?
I think we need to, I actually don't know the answer to that question right now. And I think we're going to have to follow up with you and talk to City Hall about the timeline for that too, and talk to EDC. I'm sorry, I don't have a timeline for that right now.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Welcome.
Also, my colleague, Councilmember Russell, was on earlier, and I know he had questions, but the hearing has, gone over for a while. So I do want to take a moment to ask his questions and lift up his issue. So can DOT update the committee on its plan for addressing the crumbling BQE triple cantilever?
Sure. Thank you, Council Member. So the BQE in Brooklyn, 10.5 miles stretching from the Verrazano Narrows Bridge to the Queens Brooklyn border. Most of it is owned by the state. The city owns one segment from Atlantic Avenue in the south to Sand Street in the north. This includes the roughly half-mile triple cantilever section that kind of snakes through between Brooklyn Bridge Park and Brooklyn Heights. I think share the councilman's urgency that we, this is a piece of infrastructure that really needs to be addressed. It's beyond its useful life, and we are currently, the Adams administration is reviewing the plan that was developed by the previous administration. We're looking at all our options, and that includes looking at the BIL as a potential funding source. This will be an expensive project. So we're looking at the BIL, and we're also thinking not just about the section that we own in downtown Brooklyn and Brooklyn Heights, but more holistically about the entire corridor. That review is ongoing, and we are moving with urgency, and hope to have more to say soon.
Okay, and then what is the status of the automated weight enforcement initiative on the roadway?
The WIM sensors?
I believe.
Yeah, the weight
and
motions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't have that off the top of my head. Can I follow up with you with that as well, Councilwoman?
Yeah,
Chair?
if you could share it with me and the committee
Right.
members so that we have the same information.
No problem.
Mhm.
No problem.
We received the state authorization. I believe we're in the process of procuring and installing, but we'll get you the schedule for that.
That's correct.
No, this has been great, and we're going to prepare to turn it over to the public, which I'm so thankful that they remain engaged on here. This is an important issue. We plan on holding a series of these oversight hearings pertaining to the infrastructure and the federal funding dollars that are coming down to make sure we're maximizing the opportunity and that we are ensuring that we're investing appropriately in our infrastructure. One last question, because I know I have we have the COO for DP, Vinny Sapienza. It's great to see you as always. The question I think will be more directed to you, and this is an issue that impacts I believe Chair Kagan's district, as well as Council Member Ariola, along with mine, in terms of the barges that are often abandoned in the waterway, and how we can get some resolution with moving them, because they create environmental hazards in some instances. I know the one in my district does. And if there's a way that we can leverage some of the federal infrastructure dollars to help with this, and I think we have the Army Corps folks on here too that may be able to answer this as well. So I would like to understand if this is something that's been on your radar, and if so, where we are with that. Oh, sorry. There we go.
There we go.
Thanks, Chair Brooks Powers. Kizzy, would you like me to talk about the barges, or you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just quickly on the abandoned boats and barges. We've been working with the Parks Department. They have a contract that we've been leveraging to get some of those removed. Obviously, there's a lot more that needs to be done, and we'll take a look to see whether any of the federal funding can be used for that. Thank you.
Yeah, because this is expensive, and the council members, we get a limited pot of money. So to be able to move it, it costs millions of dollars. That would take away from filling in the gap for other critical services in our district. So I've been in office for a little over a year now, and the barge predates me and has not been moved, touched, looked at, or anything. We've brought a couple of agencies out, and I know, again, like I said, it's been in some other districts, in Councilmember Ariola's district. Her predecessor spent a lot of his own discretionary and capital money to move this, but I think this is a larger issue than any one particular member.
Agreed.
Okay, so I will kick it over to council so that we can get into the public testimony.
Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers. We'll now turn to public testimony. I'd like to remind everyone that, unlike our typical council hearings, we'll be calling individuals one by one to testify. Each panelist will be given 2 minutes to speak. Please begin once the sergeant has started the timer. Council members who have questions for a particular panelist should use the raise hand function in Zoom, and I'll call on you after the panelist has completed their testimony. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will give you the go-ahead to begin upon setting the timer. Please wait for the Sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. And again, you may submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Okay, first I would like to welcome Luis Young to testify. Luis will be followed by Lisa Daglian. Luis?
Starting time.
Kagan for convening this important hearing. I'm Louise Young, the first Chief Climate Officer to be at the Controller's Office. The IIJA is an unprecedented opportunity to build a more equitable, resilient city. In partnership with Senator Schumer, advocates, and union leaders, we've developed principles paired with some concrete proposals for making the most of IIJA funds. Here are some highlights. First, one that my esteemed colleagues haven't yet touched on. Now that IIJA has finally repealed the ban on local hire for federal contracts, we need to be ready with a city local hiring strategy to connect our capital pipeline with our jobs pipeline. We can do this with the next phase of the 2nd Avenue subway, for instance, by building workforce training now so residents are ready when construction begins. Second, we must take a laser focus on climate justice, prioritizing investments in our EJ communities. A community climate corps is one way to employ local residents to steward new climate infrastructure and deliver a Green New Deal. I was glad to hear MOCEJ and DOT's testimony on this front, and I hope we can track city progress implementing new climate projects through our newly released climate dashboard. Third, we must make the most of every capital dollar by maximizing project co-benefits, strategically blending IIJA and city capital funds through joint interagency project planning. For instance, we should leverage transportation projects that make up the lion's share of IIJA funds to integrate stormwater and heat resiliency benefits in line with new IIJA initiatives like Protect and Healthy Streets programs that call for resilient projects beyond the scope of one agency's alone. Last but not least, we must act quickly to build shovel-ready projects now while pursuing broader systemic capital reforms We commend First Deputy Mayor Lorraine Grillo for taking on this much needed task of capital reform to make sure we can reap the full benefits of the IIJA by delivering future projects on time and on budget. The Controller's Office looks forward to providing sharp tracking and oversight in how the city spends IIJA dollars and are glad to further engage you all in that process. Thank you again for convening this hearing and for the opportunity to work together to secure the infrastructure that we need to thrive.
Thank you for your testimony. At this time, are there any council members that have questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we will hear from Lisa Daglian, and Lisa will be followed by Glenn Bolofsky. Lisa?
Starting time.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Lisa Daglian. I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA PCAC. Thank you for holding this hearing today during Earth Week. By bringing these committees together, you're highlighting the clear linkage that exists between our systems and ecosystems and the work we must collectively do to meet climate change goals and prevent the ravages we've already seen are possible when the built environment doesn't respect the forces of nature. Our councils represent riders on New York City subways and buses, Staten Island Railway, the Long Island Railroad, and Metro North Railroad. Even as we're still rebuilding from Superstorm Sandy, we must address different dangers that came during Hurricanes Henri and Ida. Fortunately, Washington is attuned to the needs of urban life and our transit networks. That awareness formed the basis of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, that we heard so much about this morning. Now the city, state, MTA, and all other eligible partners must take advantage of the opportunities it presents to build a stronger, more resilient, sustainable, and equitable transportation network in region. Federal funding will be critical to meeting our transit needs and our climate and resiliency goals. The MTA has doubled down on its efforts to bring in grant writers, and we suggest the city look at opportunities, at that opportunity as well. If there's money to be had, let's have at it. Here are two of our focal areas of interest. Our submitted testimony includes more details on potential funding sources the city can explore to address these key areas of concern. One, increase citywide sewer capacity to help prevent subway flooding from extreme weather events by aggressively pursuing federal funds, particularly that we saw during Ida at the 28th Street subway station, which was not an MTA caused event, but affected the MTA and its riders no less. Number two, implement and expand dedicated bus lanes, busways, and transit signal priority to help speed up
Time expired.
With more reliable and efficient service, and explore provisions of e-bus charging infrastructure along MTA bus routes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any council members that have questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, our next panelist will be Glenn Bolofsky, and Glenn will be followed by Jose de Jesus. Glenn?
Starting time.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Chairman Selvina Brooks Powers for the opportunity to be here with all the other council members today, as well as all the agencies and central staff. Everybody's playing a very important role today, and we greatly appreciate it. There's several important things that came about this morning and early this afternoon. One of them in particular is important to the entire city for anybody who tries to park or enforce parking regulations to speed traffic and improve the environment and reduce pollution. And that was brought up today by Councilwoman Mercedes Narcisse. That is that you can't read the parking signs at night, and you can barely read them during the day. And as part of the infrastructure momentum that this committee is working so hard at so early in the year, which we greatly support, we'd like to throw this out there as a consideration for the council members and central staff to consider, as well as the agency, as well as DOT. Today, all types of signs are LED signs, like all the parking meters, and they should be done in multiple languages. So people in every community can understand what the regulations mean so they can avoid a ticket and park legally. Should be able to be displayed right on your phone, just like Park Smart or just like Park New York City that DOT has implemented. So everybody understands the signs in multiple languages. so they can avoid creating obstruction of traffic, avoid creating pollution, avoid tickets, and to do their part as citizens, which most people want to do. However, it's very challenging to read the parking signs. As perhaps one of the city's most informed and educated individuals on parking rules, I can tell you when I look at a parking sign, I'm confused. And you have to read them from the top down, and they're very challenging to understand.
Time expired.
And we thank the committee and the chairwoman for our opportunity to speak today.
Thank you for your testimony, Glenn. Are there any council members with questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we'll hear from Jose de Jesus. Jose will be followed by Sarah Lind. Jose?
Starting time.
Do we have Jose?
Jose, you're muted still. You have to accept the unmute.
Sorry. Modern technology, still trying to catch up with it. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairperson Sylvia Brooks Powers and Adi Kagan for the opportunity for Amalgamated Transit Union to testify on transportation equity. I'm Jose de Jesus, President and Business Agent of ATU Local 1179, and I also testify on behalf of my labor brother, Mark Henry, Chair of the ATU New York State Legislative Conference Board and President of 1056. ATU members operate and maintain New York City transit bus routes serving primarily Queens and Staten Island residents whom routes extend into the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. Our members primarily provide the best transit options in the transit desert of Queens. The focus of transit improvement must not only be on subways or railways, it must include bus service to better serve these communities. Where speed of service is concerned, Queens suffers greatly from its inferior bus network and other forms, including before this committee, we focused on the specific service enhancements. ATU remains concerned about the process on major projects, improvements in the MTA capital plan, essential to ensure the transit riding public enjoys a reliable public transportation. In Queens, two projects that need attention include the New York Jamaica Depot and Casey Stengel Depot. The MTA New York City Transit Jamaica Bus Depot in Central Jamaica lags decades behind scheduled improvements, underserved communities in Southeast Queens, and needs to be completed. Improvements will lag to projects thus Casey Stengel Depot in Flushing against storm flooding. The Far Rockaway Depot sits in a flood zone where bus service underserves, including transit-starved Queens neighborhoods. In Staten Island, where our sister local ATU represents, transit workers' massive flooding afflicts Casey Stengel Depot. Lack of equipment remains an ongoing issue, providing fully functional depots on repairing buses, new and existing remaining essential.
Time expired.
System. The MTA needs to overhaul, create new terminals to facilitate customer transfers between these mileage points. Downtown Flushing needs a site identified for full-scale bus terminal before the development these is practical. We are long pointed to this need. Any questions? I'll be available to answer any questions if need be.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any council members with questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we will hear from Sarah Lind, and Sarah will be followed by Jackson Chabot.
Elliot, sorry,
Chair,
one moment. I just wanted to note the administration is still on for one follow-up question. Okay, we'll follow up with them offline. Thank you, Elliot.
Okay, next, Sarah Lind, we'll hear from you now. Sarah.
Starting time.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lind. I'm Director of Policy at Open Plans. Earth Day is this Friday, and the city will celebrate this weekend with 100 car-free streets around the city. But Earth Day should not be a day to celebrate. It should be a reminder of the catastrophe we're facing. One single day of car-free streets is like fixing a leaky faucet in a burning building. Never have I felt more like a character in Don't Look Up, like I must be stuck in a nightmare. If we want to protect our Earth and our most vulnerable populations from the catastrophic effects of climate change, we don't need one car-free day. We need a car-free city. While the bulk of the IIJA funding is for highways, that money is flexible and can and should be used for projects that support public transportation, cycling, and walking. That money should be used to widen and physically protect bike lanes, to create complete streets, and to reduce car dependency. Money can also be used to tear down highways to reconnect neighborhoods. But tearing down the highway is only the first step, and what replaces it can be just as bad. These roads should have traffic calming measures, street trees, frequent crossings, pedestrian refuges, bike infrastructure, and mixed-use development. And what you do with this money is important, but equally important is what you absolutely should not do. In the face of a climate catastrophe, we implore the city, do not fund any additional highway widenings. The evidence is clear that widening highways only induces more demand, causing more traffic and more pollution. Similarly, while building out EV infrastructure is important, we urge the city to not place EV chargers in the curbside space. This is public space, and just as you wouldn't put a gas station there, you shouldn't put EV chargers there. Similarly, we'd like to take this opportunity to remind the council that electric vehicles only solve one problem of the many that cars cause, including deaths and injuries, particulate pollution from tires and brake pads, which is actually worse on heavy electric cars, congestion, and much more. The key to solving all of these problems and to tackling the climate crisis is to reduce car dependency in our city. My written testimony contains more details about ways that this federal funding should be used. Please use this once-in-a-lifetime investment to prepare our city for the catastrophe that's coming. Do not bury your heads in the sand and cave to the whims of this loud but small minority of New Yorkers who demand that their desire to drive cars be prioritized. Be leaders, our children will thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we'll hear from Jackson Chabot. Jackson will be followed by Thomas DeVito. Jackson?
Starting time.
Good afternoon, and thank you for hosting this hearing. My name is Jackson Chabot, and I'm the Director of Public Space Advocacy at Open Plans. I'd like to highlight how we have the opportunity as a city to use federal funds to extend the cleanup corps, to manage open streets, take care of bioswales, and much more. The cleanup corps, according to the previous administration, employed 10,000 New Yorkers for beautification across our city. Even with modest gains, the New York City unemployment rate is still nearly twice the national average. At this moment in time, we have the opportunity to employ New Yorkers with green jobs, such as cleaning the permeable pavement that Councilmember Carr asked about earlier. We can train people on the job for these shovel-ready projects and simultaneously provide resources to neighborhoods across the city. Extending the cleanup corps will enhance our public realm and build a more livable city for all New Yorkers while employing New Yorkers. In the longer term, this model can be used to manage and care for public space. We call for an Office of Public Space Management to coordinate and strategically distribute this workforce to neighborhoods most in need, identified by the Department of Transportation's priority investment areas. Caring for public space is a jobs program. All neighborhoods should have access to clean air, space for children to play, and neighbors to socialize. We both need to allocate space to people instead of vehicles, as my colleague just mentioned, as well as provide them the necessary resources to effectively care for this space. The Open Streets program, in collaboration with the HORT, has started to move the needle in this direction and has exciting opportunities. The next step is to ensure there's a plan to manage and take care of this newly created space. Let's use these federal funds to create public space and to continue the cleanup corps to care for this public space. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any council members have questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we'll hear from Thomas DeVito, and Thomas DeVito will be followed by Kate Slevin. Tom?
Thanks so much.
Starting time.
Okay, so I want to thank Chairpersons Brooks Powers and Kagan for hosting this meeting today. My name is Tom DeVito. I'm the Public Policy Manager for Lyft's Transit Bike and Scooter team. With 11 systems and 60,000 devices, Lyft is the nation's largest bike share operator, including operating the City Bike system here in New York. So when we first launched in 2013, the system had 332 stations and around 6,000 bikes across 2 boroughs. Today, City Bike has more than 1,600 stations and more than 25,000 bikes across Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, with more expansion to come in 2022, 2023, and 2024. In a short time, City Bike has become the largest bike share system in the world outside of Asia and is likely the fastest growing transportation network in the history of New York City. In 2021, we moved more than 1.3 million New Yorkers, taking 28 million rides, moving almost as many people as the path. By the end of the current phase of expansion, 58% of New York City residents overall will live within the City Bike service area, and 70% of NYCHA residents specifically. As City Bike continues to expand its geographic footprint, greater electrification of the system is key to its continued growth and usability. Almost 65% of all longer distance interborough bike rides are on e-bikes, and City Bike users as a whole ride e-bikes 20% longer distances than classic bikes. 45% of all rides taken by reduced fare bike share members are on e-bikes, and during peak months, e-bikes are moving over 1 million riders in total. As the system of protected bike lanes also continues to grow and congestion pricing comes online, e-bikes will become even more important tools connecting communities across New York City. City Bike's 4,000 electric assist bikes are loved by riders. They're ridden 3 to 4 times more per day than the average pedal bike, and they replace car trips. Scaling e-bike ridership, however, is limited by our current operational model. Manual battery swapping is simply less efficient than if e-bikes were charged at stations while docked.
Time expired.
Today, because of lack of charging infrastructure, City Bike operations team members, they drive across the city's bike service area to perform battery swaps. We estimate electrifying even a small percentage of stations will dramatically decrease our need to do those operation swaps. You could check out my written testimony to see more details about where federal funding could support electrifying City Bike stations. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Tom. Are there any questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we will hear from Kate Slevin, and Kate will be followed by Deborah Grief. Kate?
Starting time.
Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers and Chair Kagan, for holding this hearing today. My name is Kate Slevin, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Regional Plan Association, and we're a 100-year-old nonprofit research, planning, and advocacy organization that works to improve quality of life for the 23 million residents in the New York City metropolitan area. For decades, we have advocated for spending infrastructure funds in a manner that supports health, equity, prosperity, and sustainability, the values that drive our work. And we've written extensively about infrastructure investment, including a few weeks ago, a detailed research paper that cites case studies and how municipalities and states can direct funding to promote health equity. We cite projects that might be good models for you as you move forward with this, including the removal of the Rochester Inner Loop and the construction of a network of soccer fields near transit stations through Atlanta. The council should take a fresh look at how IIJA funds are being spent by the state. While the city will get some of the funds directly, many vital decisions will be made at the state level. And if the projects don't align with health, equity, and environmental justice outcomes, they should be reevaluated. For example, widening highways like the Van Wyck widening, which is on the books right now and moving forward, simply causes more traffic at the long term, a situation called induced demand. So building bigger highways is both a waste of taxpayer money and likely to hurt public health. With all the investment in transit that's in IIJA, it is still the biggest investment in highways and roads since the Interstate Highway Bill. Without smart decisions by state and municipalities, much of the money could be spent on highway projects that do not align with state equity or climate goals. The good news is that much of the highway money is flexible and can be used for projects that support public transit, cycling, and walking. For example, the National Highway Performance Program, which I think is the largest share of the highway money, can be used for greenways or cycling projects near highways or to cap or remove highways. We are happy to meet with council about creative uses for specific programs, and Transportation for America has fact sheets that explain how this highway funding can be used for more sustainable uses. New York must take advantage of this flexibility. The council should ask how these highway funds can be directed to projects like capping the Cross Bronx Expressway, narrowing and reducing the impact of the BQE, and building out the downstate Greenway network. And we also support projects like Amtrak funds for the Gateway program, the Second Avenue subway, resignaling the subways, building the Interborough Express, and the purchase of EV buses, along with many other things. However, we hope you really question the Van Wyck
Time
Express
expired.
and other widening projects that are in the state DOT capitals program, including the expanding Route 17 in Orange and Rockland counties. Larger projects in other parts of the state mean fewer resources for projects in denser, more populated areas. Thank you for holding this hearing today, and we're happy to work with you as you move forward.
And thank you so much for that. One of the questions we didn't get to ask today was actually about Catherine Lacrosse Bronx Expressway, but we have future hearings that we can be able to raise that question to the administration. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other council members that have questions for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we will hear from Deborah Grief, and Deborah will be followed by Lonnie Portis. Deborah?
Hi, but
Starting
first,
time.
you said my name wrong. You did. My last
I
name is not
apologize.
Grief. It's Greif.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I will speak. First of all, I thank my councilman, Ari Kagan, for bringing up about the disability issues, which very few, the rest of you ignored. First of all, I'm glad he wants to fix the boardwalk in Coney Island, as well as should be for the other, any part of New York City that has a boardwalk. They're not truly accessible. I challenge any city councilman to sit in a wheelchair and wheel on it. When your back is broken afterwards and you're in pain, we'll see how that feels. Also, walkers, it's very painful for us, and we have to watch so we don't go flying and falling down. Also, the city bikes, they're not accessible. You're all worried about Green Street, but how is my accessorite supposed to get in to somewhere if all of you are walking in the street, but I, who maybe cannot walk, has to suffer because you don't care that I can't walk? Not once have I heard anything compassion about how to get accessible bicycles, which they are. You think all of us can use e-scooters. You have signs that are fading, so all of us will also, when you get older, have visual issues. We can't see it. You have not done anything to fix the curb cuts. I don't know how many times I've almost tripped with my walker, and it's not fair. You are constantly not addressing anything for the disability. Accessory, I will tell you something. If DOT would give our accessory bus stops correctly and not let cars park in there, then it would be even better. That's why a lot of times you have issues with accessory because they can't pick us up in a safe place, and they have to go round and round and round the block because they can't stop to get us. So that's another problem, but nobody's addressing this. Whenever we persons with disabilities talk about our problems, you tell us you don't want to hear it. You all had an opportunity to talk about, except for Councilman Kagan. And I think you really should be apologizing to people with disabilities in New York City. It's not fair to us. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any council members have questions for this panelist?
So I would first like to let you know that we do take the matters and the priorities of the disability community seriously. You are absolutely right by the issues you raised. I'm glad that you elevated your voice in this space. And you should also know that there is plans to have future hearings around accessoride. I've mentioned it in a past hearing before as well, where I've seen in my own district out in Far Rockaway, where I spoke to a constituent who ended up retiring early during the pandemic. It was a 3-hour commute to get to her job in Manhattan. And I've been hearing about accessoride issues for many, many years. And the point you raised also in terms of those who must rely on the transportation such as accessoride does need to be elevated, because we do often hear about different modes of transportation, including biking, but we do have to make sure that we don't forget that there are individuals and New Yorkers that require advocacy as well, which is the disability community. So know that we will be elevating those issues also. And again, thank you for raising those very important concerns.
Thank you, Chair. Next, we'll hear from Lonnie Portis. And Lonnie, Chair Kagan, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I would like to thank Deborah Gray from my district for raising a lot of important issues related to people with disabilities. These are all issues we were talking about here or did not talk about it, but like many council members raise these issues about street lights, street signs, about a broken boardwalk, about curb cuts, about ability of many New Yorkers just to go around in the city. And it's that's why it's relevant to this conversation. We are here today with DOT representatives, and this is transportation and infrastructure hearing, so it's all relevant. So thank you so much, Deborah Gray, for your advocacy, and your son, Christopher, who submitted testimony in writing, and it took you a while just to wait for your chance to speak today. So like 3.5 hours. Thank you for staying because it's very, very important to raise your voice. Thank you so much.
Chairs, I believe Councilmember Narcisse would like to be acknowledged as well.
Yeah, I just want to echo what the two chairs mentioned. Debbie, you've been an advocate for this community for many decades, and I appreciate your work, and we'll definitely support. And we are very sensitive to the needs of our community, each and every one of us. By the way, is 31 Women Strong, and we are assessing ways of making it easier. And as a nurse for 3 decades, you know, access is very important to me, and safety is very important. So we're looking forward to working and partnering with you and to hear how the best way we can make the city accessible to all. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other council members that would like to ask a question or comment? Okay, next we'll hear from Lonnie Portis, and Lonnie will be followed by Felicia Park Rogers. Lonnie?
Starting time.
Good afternoon, Chair Brooks Powers and Chair Keegan. I'm Lonnie J. Portis, the Environmental Policy and Advocacy Coordinator here at We Act for Environmental Justice. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Founded in 1988, We Act is a community-based organization in Harlem. At a city, state, and federal levels, We Act has been fighting environmental racism. We recognize and fight to remedy negative cumulative impacts of unjust policies that have plagued communities for decades. Funding from the federal government, including the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act that was signed into law in November 2021, if equitably distributed, can bring much needed investments that will begin to redress present and legacy social and environmental injustices and improve the lives of these communities in New York City. Because of limited time to testify, I will list investments that We Act think should be prioritized. A detailed written testimony will be sent after the hearing, but these investments include: 1, investment in MTA's bus electrification and the East Harlem Transit Hub. We urge committees to consider our community-based recommendations for East Harlem, one of the city's most disadvantaged communities. 2, infrastructure and investment in jobs acts for the Clean School Bus Program. Investment in investment in electrical vehicle charging infrastructure network for East Harlem, and funding the East Harlem waterfront. East Harlem is one of the most underserved communities in New York City, and for more than a decade, communities in East Harlem have been promised plans and funds to make the neighborhood more resistant to flooding. 5 is support legacy pollution cleanups and upgrade water infrastructure. Number 6 is weatherization assistance program and other clean energy investments. Number 7 is lead paint remediation. Number 8, lead service line replacement. There are over 860,000 water service lines in New York City. From the city data, we learned that 16% of these water service lines are potentially lead, and at least 27% of the water lines are made from unknown materials. And the last and the 9th one is school infrastructure, and starting with falling HVAC installation. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm looking forward to working closely with the committees on these issues, and I will be submitting more detailed written testimony. There are a lot of issues there.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Lonnie. Are there any council members with questions or comments for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we'll hear from Felicia Park Rogers, and Felicia will be followed by Miriam Bensman. Felicia?
Starting time.
Hi, I'm the Director of Regional Infrastructure Projects for Tri-State Transportation Campaign,
a nearly 30-year-old research and advocacy organization working to improve transportation, transit, equity, and environment across the tri-state region. Like Lonnie, I will be submitting written testimony with further detail, but I wanted to highlight some of our priority projects that are touched by IIJA. We realize these are multi-authority, multi-jurisdictional projects. Some of them are huge, and yet each of them are very important to the city, and you have opportunities to weigh in, whether through applying for funding or influencing the policy and decisions that go into them and their eventual outcome. One, of course, is the Gateway project in Hudson Tunnels, and I won't go into that more now. Second is the redesign of Penn Station and the improvement of the Penn Station area. The city must be active and aggressive on these projects. Millions of residents and visitors need transit improvements and street improvements through Penn Station. The city also should receive its fair due of property tax dollars from this redevelopment, and we strongly support the suggestion of the Community Advisory Committee to the Penn Station that one oversight body be created to make all the involved parties work together to make one cohesive project that serves New Yorkers, commuters, and visitors to New York. The Cross Harbor Freight Tunnel is a very important project. Many of you talked today about the impact of trucks and freight moving through your communities. And the IIJA provides an opportunity to build a tunnel from New Jersey to Brooklyn to keep heavy freight on rail and keep it off of the streets of Brooklyn, Queens, and Long Island. There are significant impacts, and I would love to talk with any of you more about this very important project. Related to that is the Interborough Express, which has also been talked about today, which would connect Queens and Brooklyn and is a vital link for workers and people in transit deserts.
Time expired.
Okay, I have further points about the LaGuardia Airport, the Open Streets project, and I would like to just second everything Kate Slevin said about the highways. There's $5 billion that the New York State DOT will be shifting to city DOT, and that money should not be going to highways. It should be going to streets improvements and other projects for pedestrian safety and accessibility. Thanks for letting me keep talking.
Thank you for your testimony. And just as a reminder to all panelists, in order for council members to review your full written testimony, please submit to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Next, we will hear from Miriam Bensman, and Miriam will be followed by Eric McClure. Miriam?
Starting time.
Hello. My name is Miriam Bensman. I'm a resident of Richmond Hill, Queens, and a senior advisor for the Queens Link, a grassroots group advocating for extending the subway in Queens to transit deserts. I've been delighted today to hear the careful attention and advocacy for transit equity, environmental justice, and resilience from council members and the public, and the agents and of the efforts underway by our agencies right now. I'm here to speak in strong agreement with Sarah Lind and Kate Seven that to achieve these goals, we need to reduce car use by adding to public transit. And that means not adding lanes to highways, specifically in my case, the Van Wyck Expressway. And I'm here to discuss a potential alternative. The Queens Link would use the city-owned right-of-way of the old Long Island Railroad Rockaway Beach line to extend the M train south from Rego Park and Queens Boulevard to the Rockaways. Would be the only north-south transit corridor in Queens. It would run roughly parallel to the Van Wyck. 4 years ago, an MTA feasibility study found this subway extension feasible and estimated it would have about 47,000 riders a day on average. That estimate appears low because it doesn't seem to include people transferring from other lines that it would connect with, like the J train or the
Time
Airport
expired.
Express. I'm going to finish my sentence. I have two more. It also doesn't include all the people that go to Rockaway Beach by car. Here's my challenge to council members. Will you include funding for a Tier 1 environmental impact statement in this year's budget about what the pluses and potential problems would be with this proposal? The EIS would cost $500,000 to $1 million. It's not a lot for something that could create hundreds of thousands of jobs and real environmental justice. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any council members with questions or comments for this panelist? Okay, seeing none, next we'll hear from Eric McClure, and Eric will be followed by Laura Shepard. Eric?
Starting time.
Thank you, Chairs Brooks, Powers, and Kagan for holding this hearing today. My name is Eric McClure, and I'm the Executive Director of Streets PAC. Thanks to an unprecedented flow of federal infrastructure funding, New York City has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to upgrade and expand its transportation system. While there are many pots of federal money, quite a few of which are tied to competitive grants, Streets PAC believes the city should be guided by a few overarching principles. First, similarly to the priority investment areas outlined in the New York City Streets Plan, funding should be prioritized in communities that have historically been underserved. Economically disadvantaged and predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods should receive priority when it comes to these transportation initiatives. Secondly, investments in transportation infrastructure should emphasize safety and accessibility, especially the safety of vulnerable street users. The reversal in the progress of the city's Vision Zero initiative has reached a critical juncture. We know that investments in complete streets, protected bike lanes, curb extensions, raised crosswalks, and similar design treatments improve safety for everyone. And the influx of federal funds can both expand and speed up the implementation of these types of infrastructure. Similarly, we should take this opportunity to accelerate the pace of investment in making our transit system 100% accessible. Thirdly, we believe the city should prioritize quick build projects wherever federal funding will support that. Dedicated bus lanes, busways, protected bike lanes, and a host of other traffic calming installations can be implemented quickly and often at relatively low cost. Bus and bike improvements can also help to plug gaps in transit deserts. Relatedly, we believe the availability of federal funds for alternative transportation modes presents a golden opportunity to subsidize the accelerated expansion of the city's bike share program. Bike share remains the only aspect of our transportation system that receives no subsidy, and we should seize this chance to expand bike share across the 5 boroughs and to New Yorkers of all means. Finally, we want to amplify the call by Councilmember Rivera and others to make a substantial investment in the city's Greenway network. Greenways have the potential to extend open space into all corners of the city and to serve as the backbone of a safe, separated, and resilient citywide bike network. Federal funds can jumpstart the city's decades-old plan to build a robust
Time expired.
network. Let's not let this opportunity go to waste. And thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, Eric. Are there any council members that have questions for this panelist? Okay, next we'll hear from Laura Shepard, and Laura will be followed by Carlos Castel-Croak. Laura?
Starting time.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Shepard, Queens organizer with Transportation Alternatives. For nearly 50 years, TA has led the movement for safe, equitable streets in New York City. We're at a critical juncture when it comes to how we respond to the climate crisis. The decisions we make will determine the survival and well-being of New Yorkers for generations. It is critical that new federal funding is invested equitably to address longstanding infrastructure needs in underserved communities. We can reverse the effects of decades of racist environmental policies in underserved areas by focusing these funds on areas that face the worst flooding, slowest buses, highest asthma rates, and fewest Vision Zero investments to prevent traffic violence. Our public space and transit system must be a focal point in how we shift to more resilient infrastructure. Better use of streets and waterways can reduce car emissions, clean the air, and improve public health. This is why, alongside more than 200 local partners, we have advanced our New York City 25 by 25 vision to reclaim 25% of street space from cars and return it to people. Cars and trucks are responsible for 29% of all air pollution produced in New York City. By putting street space to better use, like building out pedestrian plazas, parklets, and busways, we can reduce these harmful carbon emissions. New York should be setting an example for the rest of the country but our state has actually seen a significant increase in transportation emissions. Buildings and on-road transportation account for 84% of emissions in New York City. And after a series of first-in-the-nation laws in New York City, building emissions dropped 25%, yet on-road transportation emissions actually increased in the 4 years leading up to COVID. Research shows that to achieve the city's necessary climate goals, over 80% of all trips must be made by sustainable modes. The New York Climate Action Council draft scoping plan released earlier this year found that New York will need to substantially reduce vehicle miles traveled while increasing access to public transportation. The council's report estimates that the cost of inaction I'll just finish my sentence. In addressing our transportation needs exceeds the cost of action by 90 to 120 billion. 40 billion associated with the health benefits of increased active transportation, walking and cycling, and 50 to 120 billion from 2050 to 2050 of health benefits from increased air quality. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for this panelist? Okay, next we will hear from Carlos Castel-Croke. Carlos?
Starting time.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Castel-Croke. I'm the Associate for New York City Programs at the New York League of Conservation Voters. I'd like to thank the chairs, Brooks Powers and Councilmember Kagan, for the opportunity to testify today. The infrastructure bill secured an investment of $1.2 trillion, some of which will be used to fund new climate resilience projects such as electric school buses, electric vehicle infrastructure, zero and low emission public transit, removal of lead pipes and PFAS to improve drinking water, and pollution remediation. Many of these slated projects will be invaluable to our fight against climate change, but since New York has so much authority over how this money is spent, I'd like to highlight some ideas for sustainable projects that we should be prioritizing. One major way we can reduce emissions in our city is by encouraging the use of low emission forms of transportation like trains, buses, bikes, e-bikes, and scooters. By using highway and road funding, we can build out a connected network of bike lanes, protected bike lanes, making it safer to cycle around the city. We can also expand access to e-bikes, like the City Bikes pedal assisted system, which allows more people not only to have access to bikes, but give them an easy way to commute or travel long distances on them. A majority of the funding for transportation is set for road and highway infrastructure. However, we strongly believe that the city and state need to be investing more heavily in public transportation in order to achieve our emissions reduction goals. Building out bus lanes and installing enforcement technology to protect them will bolster bus ridership and reduce car dependency. Similarly, investing in our subway and rail systems by improving service, upgrading technology, and increasing accessibility will also drastically cut down on carbon emissions from automobiles. The proposed Interborough Express and expansion of Second Avenue subway lines are great examples of building out our subway system to provide access to commonly underserved neighborhoods. With this funding, we must invest in resilient infrastructure, such as green spaces, bioswales, and rain gardens to absorb stormwater and fight flooding. Our parks are an invaluable environmental asset, absorbing 2 billion gallons of stormwater runoff every year. Expanding parks and green spaces is an amazing way to increase resiliency while also fighting urban heat and air pollution. Projects like capping the Crossbrook Expressway are great examples of green spaces that can provide resilience in neighborhoods that are already overburdened by a multitude of climate hazards and injustices. I'll finish up. The New York City Department of Transportation has set an ambitious and transformative agenda in the New York City Streets Plan, and we know that climate hazards will only become more frequent as the years go by. Therefore, it is incumbent upon our elected leaders to invest heavily in low-emission forms of transportation and resilient infrastructure with this once-in-a-lifetime funding opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any council members with questions for this panelist? Okay, at this time, if we've inadvertently missed anyone that registered to testify and has yet to have been called, please use the Zoom raise hand function and I will call on you in order that it's been raised. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to Chair Brooks Powers and then Chair Kagan for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Elliot. I just would like to thank everyone for joining today's Transportation Infrastructure and Environmental Resiliency Committee joint hearing. It's, again, mentioned earlier, the first of a series of hearings that we seek to have to take a look at the city's infrastructure and provide the council's perspective on how we best see the investments and the needs of the city's infrastructure and transportation. and resiliency. And thank you to the members of the public who stayed on to elevate your voice. And I will now pass it to Chair Kagan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Brooks Powers. Thank you to all committee members, to all council members who joined us, to all staff of the committee, on both committees, I would say. Thank you to members of public for joining us patiently for all these hours. Thank you to representatives of city administration. Hopefully this hearing will help to move our city forward in terms of our streets, in terms of our transportation issues, in terms of our federal funding for infrastructure. So we're all looking for effective use of federal resources to improve our resiliency, our outdated infrastructure. Thank you so much, and hope that next hearing will be even more effective and more productive. Thank you so much.